Chapter 856. In the dark of the night, a bolt of lightning came swiftly from afar. As it neared, it had already reached the periphery of Tianxian Cliff. The newcomer did not hesitate at all, plunging into the thick fog that shrouded Tianxian Cliff. His aura was like a thunderclap that descended from the 9 heavens. The newcomer was Jun Moyan. The unrivaled swordsman, unwilling to add to his regrets, had traveled day and night, finally arriving at Tianxian Cliff after a long and arduous journey. According to the agreed time of the battle, it was already long overdue. It was more than half a month ago. It was impossible for an ordinary battle to last until now. In fact, when Jun Moyan received Yutong's message, it was already past the agreed date. Jun Moyan had rushed over with only a sliver of hope. When he was nearing his destination, Jun Moyan caught sight of Yutong's eastern troops stationed around Tianxian Cliff. He noticed that Yutong's troops were anxious but not sorrowful. This observation made Jun Moyan come to a conclusion: the battle was not over yet? If so, the heavens would have mercy on him and not add to his regrets. However, just as Jun Moyan dashed into Tianxian Cliff impatiently, he dashed out again in a hurry. Amidst the flashing sword light that was won with his sword, he circled Tianxian Cliff 3 to 4 times in an instant. It was because Tianxian Cliff had transformed into a forbidden area in the truest sense of the word. The current Tianxian Cliff was not only shrouded in fog that obscured one's vision. Mr. Nian and his men had set up no less than 40 to 50 formations around Tianxian Cliff. Large formations overlapped with smaller ones, interlocking with each other. It was almost impenetrable. No matter how skilled Jun Moyan was in swordsmanship, he was only a layman when it came to formations. When he first entered, he was like a headless fly. After randomly bumping around for a bit, he triggered a chain reaction of many formations. If it wasn't for his extraordinary strength, he wouldn't have escaped in such a sorry state. Instead, he would have died within and died with regret. Jun Moyan knew himself best. He knew that he could not go deep into Tianxian Cliff, so he circled around it, hoping to find a breakthrough from the periphery. Unfortunately, after a few rounds, he could not find a way in. Mr. Nian was a wise man. Although he did not know that Jun Moyan had returned to help Yun Yang, he did not overlook Yun Yang's other 3 strong helpers, Ling Xiaozui, Du Guchou, and Heaven's Inquisitor, Gu Chaoliang. Mr. Nian's ultimate goal in this battle was to kill Yun Yang, so it was only natural that he wanted to cut off all possible assistance from Yun Yang. The formation that he had set up outside Tianxian Cliff was not only to prevent Yun Yang from escaping if he lost the battle, but it was also to keep all of Yun Yang's external help away from Tianxian Cliff. These formations were set up with Ling Xiaozui, Du Guchou, and Gu Chaoliang in mind. One could imagine how powerful and effective they were. Even with Jun Moyan's ability, he was helpless. He could only stand there with his sword in hand, feeling helpless. Jun Moyan sighed inwardly. Was he going to be denied entry after traveling tens of thousands of miles to help Yun Yang? He had waited so long for the son of his old friend to be trapped in a death trap, thinking that the heavens had opened their eyes. Yet, he could not even break through the outer door. Was he facing despair directly after touching hope? Jun Moyan did not give up. He kept probing and searching, but he could not find any opening that he could enter. Who set up this formation? Why is it so meticulous? Isn't this a little too much? Jun Moyan's frustration had already risen to its peak, and he was burning with anxiety. It was dawn. Ling Xiaozui and Du Guchou had arrived as well. It was a pity that they could only lament their inadequacy in the face of such an impenetrable formation. When the 3 of them met, they were overjoyed, thinking that they had gathered the 3 people with the highest cultivation base in the world. What barrier could they not break? What barrier could they not break? But in reality, they had been blocked by this series of compound array formations, unable to enter. The 3 of them tried again and again, but the effect was minimal. They could not even achieve half the result with twice the effort. They could not help but look at each other, dumbfounded. Dugu Cho heaved a long sigh. Everyone has their own specialties. The study of formations is indeed unique. There should be nothing that the three of us can't break if we work together, but the formation within this formation is interconnected and has become one with the entire Tianxian cliff. It's really hard to shake it. Jun Moyan said, I arrived first and attacked with all my might, hoping to shake the foundation of this formation, but it was like a mayfly trying to shake a tree. When the three of us work together, the situation is much better, but we'll have to work together for at least 3 days. Otherwise, it'll be difficult to break this formation completely. Ling Xiaozu frowned and shook his head. If only Gu Chaoliang hadn't gone to the bound of universe. His divination is best at seeking fortune and avoiding calamity. He can tell us to avoid the strong and attack the weak. If the three of us attack forcefully, can Yunyang wait even if the entire Tianxian cliff is blown up 3 days later? The three of them were dejected, feeling that the lack of strength was driving them mad. Yet, they had the will but not the strength, there was nothing they could do. Dawn of the next day. Yunyang felt uneasy all of a sudden. He stood up and looked towards the back of the mountain based on his intuition. Although his vision was filled with thick fog and he could not see anything, he could vaguely smell a burnt smell coming from afar. It was the smell of burnt flesh. It seemed like Mr. Nian was cremating the Four Seasons Tower's men's corpses. In the cave. Looking at the corpses piled up like a mountain at the entrance, Mr. Nian's face was emotionless, his usual nonchalance was nowhere to be seen. Before him were 24 corpses of the Four Seasons Tower's men. Other than the 4 men who had been turned into ashes by Ji Lingxi's counterattack, the other 24 corpses were all here. However, there were only 18 people who had died in the hands of Yunyang and Ji Lingxi. How could there be 24 corpses? Unless, the few who had not died in yesterday's battle had all been turned into corpses now. Only then could there be 24 corpses. The truth was as such. Other than Mr. Nian, the Four Seasons Tower's men who had participated in the battle had all perished. Each of them was drenched in blood. Their flesh was a mess. Mr. Nian sat in a daze. In front of him were pieces of God's bones, all of them glowing brilliantly. Many of them were stained with the blood of their original owners. Mr. Nian murmured, "Don't blame me. I'm doing this for the Four Seasons Tower," he spoke calmly. Then, he took out a sharp dagger and cut open his own arm without hesitation. Fresh blood gushed out at once. No matter how profound one's cultivation base was, it was inevitable that one would bleed from cutting one's own flesh. Mr. Nian's expression did not change. Like dismembering a spiritual beast's limb, he picked out a piece of his own bone and replaced it with a corresponding piece of God's bone. Chapter 857. There's nothing I can do. I didn't expect things to go out of control like this and end up in such a mess. This should have been done before the altar. I should have taken medicine to recuperate and drink the forbidden water to eliminate the rejection. I should have also used the 12 rare spiritual medicines as a supplement, and I should have been protected by powerful experts. At least 12 people would have continued to inject mystical qi into me. But now, there's nothing else. I can only take the risk and complete this on my own. I can't care about anything else now. The backlash caused by different gods' bones being inserted into a person's body will turn him into a wandering ghost forever. Once he dies, he'll never be able to enter the cycle of reincarnation. I'll bear all of this alone, don't accuse me of wronging all of you. The pain I'm suffering now is far greater than all of you dying in one swift stroke. My sacrifice is much more than you can imagine. In the end, I have no other choice. If I don't take this step, I can only watch as I lose everything. Mr. Nian's eyes glimmered with a faint gleam. Another slash. This time, it was his thigh that was cut open. He repeated the same process of removing the bone and changing the bone. There was almost no pause. The fire burned brightly as the corpses of the Four Seasons Tower's men slowly disappeared. Countless corpses were convulsing and contorting from the heat, no longer in human form. They were completely consumed by the flames, no longer existing. The fire flickered as if there were pairs of eyes watching Mr. Nian from the dark. It was hard to tell if they were angry or hateful. Under the illumination of the fire, Mr. Nian was already covered in blood, but he was still cutting himself again and again, digging out his bones piece by piece and embedding God's bones into his own body. His face grew paler. The excessive loss of blood caused his body, which was already not in a good condition, to become even weaker. In spite of this, his gaze grew fiercer and his expression more menacing. Early morning. Yun Yang and Ji Lingxi walked out side by side, their expressions unusually grim. Leave Mr. Nian and the other seasonal messengers to me for today's battle. Yun Yang said slowly, you'll be responsible for holding off the others. Come back to support me after they're done with. We'll definitely win this battle. Ji Lingxi nodded slowly. All right. Don't worry. Even if I can't win quickly, I can at least guarantee that none of them will make it. Today's battle will settle all grudges and worldly affairs. Amidst the silence, the thick fog floated around as if it was tangible, almost within reach. Somehow, Mr. Nian was already standing in front of the Temple of Nine Supremes. He was still wearing the same green robes as before, but his face was abnormally pale, and the look in his eyes was like that of a hungry wolf. He was indescribably ferocious and bloodthirsty, no longer as magnanimous and graceful as before. Yun Yang asked, why are you the only one here? Where are your subordinates? They've all gone down to wait for you. I won't let them wait too long, Mr. Nian said darkly. Yun Yang squinted his eyes and said mockingly, indeed, it is as I have guessed. Mr. Nian, the Four Seasons Tower's master is indeed ruthless and venomous. This is what it means to be a formidable character. The ghostly fire in Mr. Nian's eyes flickered. What is it? When you came to collect the corpses yesterday, I guessed that you wanted to gather all the gods' bones together. Then, you would gather them on one person and unleash the power of the gods' bones to the maximum. Only then would you be able to fight both of us. Yun Yang said coldly, other than that, I can't think of any other tricks you could use to turn the tables. Right now, the truth has proven that my guess is correct. Mr. Nian, the Four Seasons Tower is now completely destroyed in your hands. Yun Yang looked up mockingly. From the beginning, you sent your men to be killed, to now, you've killed all your subordinates yourself. The Four Seasons Tower finally no longer exists. And my biggest goal has finally been achieved. Your wish has been achieved. If you were to die today, would that be considered a death without regrets? Mr. Nian stood with his arms behind his back, staring at Yun Yang maliciously. The feeling of dying without regrets is only meaningful to the loser. It has nothing to do with me. Yun Yang smiled gently. Before the final battle, I would like to know why you still gave me the 4 pieces of God's bones, since you know my real purpose of collecting them? Mr. Nian asked curiously. This was what he was most puzzled about. Even if Yun Yang had seen through his true intention and wanted to use him to kill the others, there was no need for him to hand over the 4 pieces of God's bones. He did not even have to reject the 3 corpses. No matter what, he would still kill the few lucky survivors and obtain their gods' bones to fight the final battle. Because I'm afraid that your collection isn't complete. Yun Yang smiled. If the collection isn't complete, I'm afraid you won't activate the plan. Although the chances aren't great, I never bet on what if. If you really don't activate this plan, I really can't be sure if the Four Seasons Tower has anyone left, or how many. But as long as you start the plan, once you do it, you'll have to do it. Then your men will be killed by you. I don't even have to worry about it. Because you will definitely kill them all. If that's the case, the 4 pieces of God's bones that I've given to facilitate and confirm this situation are clearly worth it. Yunyang smiled faintly. Of course, the main reason is that I've mastered my mystical skill. I'm eager to see the 4 Seasons Tower's greatest counterattack. If I don't let you use it in the final battle, I think you'll be very dissatisfied, and die with regrets. Yunyang smiled. As the opponent I want to kill the most, I'm more than happy to give you the chance to kill all your men and destroy the 4 Seasons Tower's legacy to facilitate this. Mr. Nian chuckled coldly. Yunyang, do you know that I've heard about how someone dug his own grave? I've always thought that the negative examples in the martial world were fabricated, that they were nothing more than falsehoods in novels. How could there be such a stupid superior in this world? Today, however, I believe that it's all true. Because there's such a person standing in front of me, a person who's called Supreme Wit. Supreme Wit, who's renowned for his stratagems, is actually nothing more than an arrogant, narrow-minded person deep down in his bones. Mr. Nian's smile was icy as he said cruelly, "Now, I'm very happy because I'm going to leave such a legend for the martial world. I'm honored to leave my name in the martial world's history like this." Yunyang was smiling proudly, feeling a sense of accomplishment. "You've asked me a question. Now, I'd like to ask you one too, Mr. Nian. May I ask, how did it feel to kill your brothers of thousands of years with your own hands last night? After that, I personally cut open my body bit by bit and dug out my own bones piece by piece. How does it feel? Does it feel good?" Chapter 858. Mr. Nian's lean face contorted when he heard what Yunyang said. He shuddered and said through gritted teeth, "Supreme Cloud, since it's a final battle, it should be completed by the 2 of us. Am I right?" "I know what you mean. You're just wary of Lingxi's mystical red light. Even with God's bones, you still don't have the guts to face it. You're trying to provoke me into a duel to the death with you. It doesn't matter. I'll fulfill your request." "Then, what are you waiting for?" Mr. Nian grinned. "Back then, you had your brother's blood feud to avenge. You've come this far. Now, I have my brother's blood debt to claim as well. Let's see who belongs to heaven's will in the end. Will the 9 dragons howl eternally, or will the 4 seasons sink eternally?" Yunyang guffawed. "I wonder if your brothers in the underworld will die again from anger when they hear you call them brothers. The 4 Seasons Tower's downfall has long been a foregone conclusion. Why do you have to repeat yourself?" With a loud roar, Mr. Nian sprung up. He went all out with his first strike, his force unparalleled. Mr. Nian's attack this time was completely different from before. It was as if he was a completely different person. His previous fighting style was more of a neutral and peaceful king's way. Apart from being grand and imposing, it was also carefree and unrestrained. But this time, it was filled with ferocity and viciousness. It was as if he was going to slaughter the world. His ferocity was monstrous and domineering. If one were to say that Mr. Nian's previous words and actions were laced with an admirable demeanor of an expert, especially his carefree and unruffled demeanor, which gave one a favorable impression of him. However, the current Mr. Nian was only left with viciousness. Viciousness. Cruelty, and an evil that made one's hair stand on end. It was both intimidating and disgusting at the same time. In spite of this, it was undeniable that the cultivation base power that Mr. Nian was displaying now was earth-shattering and earth-shattering. Whenever he raised his hand casually, the wind would howl. The piercing sound of air being torn apart would cause the ears of those involved to ache for a long time. The complete collection of God's bones had increased Mr. Nian's abilities by at least 3 times. Yunyang raised his palm to meet the attack, intending to test Mr. Nian's current level of ability. However, the moment their palms collided, Yunyang felt a jolt run through his body. He was flung 100 feet away, unable to defend himself. Although Yun Yang was flung away by the force of the palm strike, he landed safely with a somersault, a weight lifted off his chest. Although Mr. Nian's improvement was shocking, he seemed to be neglecting the essentials. Even if he were stronger, it would be difficult for him to control the overall situation. Supreme Cloud, how does my palm feel? The complete fusion of the divine bones is nothing more than this. That's all? It's more than enough to kill you. Ha ha ha. Yun Yang guffawed. You can't unleash the god's bones' full potential by forcefully fusing it like this, am I right? Isn't this combat power less than expected for you? Disappointed? Are you depressed? Mr. Nian did not speak anymore. He attacked and battled without restraint. As the battle went on, his attacks grew fiercer and his aura grew stronger. It was obvious that Mr. Nian's hidden power was far more than this. As the battle went on, he unleashed it more intensely. Before the old power was exhausted, new power was born. It was endless and endless. The majesty of his power was unprecedented and appalling. In spite of this, Mr. Nian knew very well that Yun Yang was right. His cultivation base had indeed increased, by a lot. However, the crux of the problem now was that he could not unleash the full potential of the god's bone. The so-called growing stronger as the battle went on was only temporary. It was only because of the sudden increase in his skill that his offensive power had increased correspondingly. As the battle continued to intensify, the god's bones would show resistance due to the differences between them. His combat power was bound to fall. Mr. Nian was well aware of the situation. Without 30 to 50 years of adjustment, it was impossible for the fusion to be successful without any barriers. The fusion this time was lacking too many auxiliary elements and related conditions. It could be said that the fusion of the god's bone was a complete failure. Although he could use it for the time being and could even unleash battle prowess far beyond what it had been in the past, once the battle was over and he returned, he would still have to extract the divine bones piece by piece before fusing them again and again. In other words, he would have to repeat today's skinning and deboning and endure the torture of 1,000 cuts dozens of times. Not only that, there would be more serious consequences. His expression was unusually pained, but countless saber light and sword energy gushed out of Mr. Nian's body. With a wave of his right hand, saber light shone brilliantly, with a wave of his left hand, sword energy surged. As he moved, a frosty air emanated from his chest. Ice materialized at his neck bone, turning into ice blades that spun out. There was also a strange energy slowly surging from his feet. His feet danced like the wind and clouds. His left foot moved like the wind, while his right foot moved like the clouds. No, the changes in Mr. Nian's body did not stop there. Almost every part of his body had a different kind of power slowly manifesting. All sorts of unimaginable powers came in an endless stream. As these powers appeared, Mr. Nian's expression grew more and more contorted and pained. Yun Yang switched from offense to defense, focusing his attention on dodging and shifting to evade the attacks that were coming at him from every direction. He looked like he was at a complete disadvantage and was in a precarious situation, but the look in his eyes grew calmer. Right now, he was like a small boat on a raging sea, bobbing up and down with the wind and waves, in danger of capsizing at any time. In actuality, he was safe and sound. Mr. Nian attacked ceaselessly, sending out countless strange forces to assist him. Yun Yang, on the other hand, dodged with increasing dexterity. His body was so nimble that it was as if he had regained his formless cloud manifestation. The attacks of the strange forces were futile. Seeing that his attacks were futile, Mr. Nian howled, "Yun Yang, I'd like to see how long you can keep dodging. My mystical chi is limitless and endless. I don't even need to use my own mystical chi cultivation base. God's bones' godly power alone will allow me to fight you until the end of time. Be quick, come forward and accept your death." Yun Yang replied coldly, since you're so powerful, who are you putting on such a pained expression for? Are you trying to gain sympathy? That's true. Fighting with so many different gods' bones on you, it must feel terrible. Let's see if you exhaust me to death or if you can't take it anymore and die from the backlash. The muscles on Mr. Nian's face contorted. It was not something he could control. He wanted to control it, wanted to show his nonchalance, but he did not have the strength to do so. The agony made it harder for him to control himself. It was already the result of his best effort not to scream and scream. Therefore, every word he wanted to speak now had to be bellowed at the loudest volume he could muster. Perhaps, this method could alleviate some of his indescribable pain. Chapter 859. His cultivation base was immensely powerful, but the torture he had to endure at every moment was equally terrifying. Mr. Nian had hoped to provoke Yunyang into attacking him in a frenzy. Other than ending the battle as soon as possible, he could also vent his frustration and discomfort. However, Yunyang had no intention of fighting him head-on. Every move and every style of his was an all-out attack, but in the end, they all hit the air, and it was all in vain. Under Mr. Nian's terrifying offensive that was almost unconventional, Tianxian Cliff was filled with dust and gravel. Countless trees that could be hugged flew up as well, swaying back and forth in the air. In spite of this, Yunyang was like a slippery loach, dodging and evading, his movement skill twice as agile. No matter how many attacks you have, I'm not playing with you. Mr. Nian was enraged. He howled and attacked, but his efforts were futile. At this moment, he was filled with regret. Yes, Supreme Cloud's cloud invisibility had the ability to evade any attack in the world. What he had done seemed rather inappropriate. Not only was it twice the effort for half the result, but it was also completely useless and unhelpful. As the battle continued to intensify, Mr. Nian slowly familiarized himself with his rhythm and the flow of God's bones' divine power in his body. As he reflected, he came up with a strategy to counter Yunyang. After all, Yunyang had been dodging and not attacking. He was not a threat to him. It was difficult for him to lock onto the other party, but the other party was helpless against him as well. As he thought about it, he felt a sense of relief even. If Yunyang had only dodged and not retaliated, he would have been in an unwinnable position. It would be a joke to wait for him to be unable to withstand the backlash from God's bone. If the battle continued, it would only allow him to familiarize himself with God's bone's divine power. Under the current rhythm, as long as he could find the pattern of God's bone's coordination and find an effective way to harmonize his flesh and blood with God's bone, his ability would increase exponentially from his current foundation to an unimaginable height. When that time came, no matter how good Supreme Cloud was at dodging, he would only end up with a grievance under his absolute attack. Furthermore, as his physical body gradually harmonized with God's bone, he believed that he would not be in as much pain as he was now. In that case, this battle and the current dire situation might actually be an opportunity for him, a turning point. As he thought of this, Mr. Nian felt a tinge of delight in his heart. The numbness, itchiness, pain, numbness, needles, slashes, and sword slashes all over his body had lightened considerably. As long as I persevere, not only will victory belong to me, an even more glorious life is still waving at me. Mr. Nian's attack was still unstoppable. It rained down like a thunderstorm, raining down like lightning. However, everyone, including Ji Lingxi, could tell that Mr. Nian was obviously experimenting with something. Perhaps, he was adapting to something. It was like a person with great strength adapting to an ingeniously constructed and extremely heavy weapon. In the early stages of using it, his combat strength was only average and could not be of great use. But once he succeeded, or perhaps it could be said that after he had familiarized himself with it, how terrifying would it be? It was an unimaginable terror. Yunyang, retaliate. Ji Lingxi could not help crying out, we can't let him continue to adapt. Yunyang smiled and said, "How can I not let Mr. Nian enjoy the last battle?" Ji Lingxi was speechless. Your current Xian Qi cultivation base is obviously far inferior to that of the other party. You are only relying on your superb body movement skill to barely contend with the other party. This is something that cannot be clearer. If the other party's cultivation base were to increase again, your body movement skill may not be of any use anymore. You're already in a precarious situation, yet you still want to play with your enemy. Aren't you afraid of killing yourself? Ji Lingxi stomped her feet in frustration. You don't usually seem like such a pedantic person, such a stupid person. Do you have to be so particular about manners when dealing with your mortal enemy? You actually don't let the other party have any regrets and let your enemy enjoy himself? Who did you learn this bullsh** T theory from? No matter how anxious Ji Lingxi was, Yunyang persisted with his course of action. Mr. Nian guffawed. Supreme Cloud is Supreme Cloud indeed. You're a sincere gentleman, a saint of chivalry. I'm impressed. Impressed. Deep down, he was thinking, this is the problem of these so-called gentlemen who call themselves righteous people. They're so inflexible, they follow the rules, they don't allow this, they insist on this. What a joke. Since the beginning of time, the deaths of so-called heroes were basically the result of their own actions. Mr. Nian almost wanted to say out loud the words of wisdom in his heart. Although the pain in his body was gradually increasing, it also meant that a certain kind of fusion was speeding up and solidifying due to the intense battle. As Mr. Nian endured the agony, the inexplicable pleasure that he felt surged. The battle went on for a full 10 hours. Yunyang had only been dodging throughout. It looked like he was in danger, but he was actually not in the slightest danger. He was not injured at all. Mr. Nian, on the other hand, looked as if he was about to die at any moment and did not stop attacking with all his might. Not only did his attacks not slacken, they grew more and more powerful instead. As the battle went on, his movements became smoother and smoother. God's bones were still glowing faintly, so faint that not even his skin and flesh could block it out. Now, however, the glow was slowly fading away. It was a clear sign that God's bones were slowly assimilating into Mr. Nian's body. They were truly fusing. Since some time ago, Mr. Nian's mystical qi had been growing steadily. If Mr. Nian's cultivation base had tripled in the beginning, it was now at least 5 times stronger than it was before. In spite of this, Mr. Nian was trying his best to control it, hiding it carefully so that Yunyang would not discover his true capability. He was afraid that Yunyang would forcefully stop his fusion if he found out about it. As the battle went on, as the god's bones fused, and as his capability grew, Mr. Nian began to despise Yunyang more and more. The 4 pieces of God's bones that he had lost and regained from Yunyang were simply too useful. They were even more useful than all the other God's bones combined. The divine power contained within them was extraordinarily powerful, but he did not feel any discomfort ever since they entered his body. Pure spiritual qi flowed into his neck, tibia, spine, and ribs from time to time. Although they were still sword, snow, frost, and ice in essence, they seemed to be maintaining their own mystical energy on purpose, trying their best to soothe the damage caused by the rejection of the other god's bones. It could even be said that without these 4 pieces of bones, his fusion of the ancient city would not have been so smooth. It would have been at least twice as painful. Chapter 860. These 4 pieces of God's bones were already in his hands and he had nurtured them to such an extent. No one could say anything if he did not hand them over, but he had insisted on doing so openly. Perhaps, he had wanted to set up a trap, but now, he had fallen into it. Supreme Cloud had given away God's bones. Supreme Cloud had lost his life because he had given away God's bones. How exhilarating! Just thinking about it made Mr. Nian feel much better. Another 2 hours passed. Mr. Nian felt that no matter how he attacked, not only was the mystical qi within him not depleted, it was becoming more and more abundant. There was even a subtle feeling that his entire body was bloated and could not be released unless he spat it out. Mr. Nian, who was familiar with his condition, naturally knew that his meridians had reached their limit. If he were to continue hiding under such a condition and continue to pour mystical qi into his body, he would really explode. Fortunately, he did not need to do so now. With his strength, there was no need for him to hide anymore. Instead of being moved, Mr. Nian let out a long howl. "Supreme Cloud, your time is up." Yunyang smiled faintly. "On the contrary, it should be your time." Yunyang's eyes glinted with intense mockery. "By now, I believe that you've absorbed all of the God's bones energy that I've given you." Mr. Nian guffawed. He was so full of himself that he did not even notice the abnormality in Yunyang's tone. Before his laughter died away, Mr. Nian stood up abruptly and let out another long howl. 5 rays of white light rose from his body, as if countless swords were shining on him. He raised his arm, a ball of purple qi rising from his fair palm. The wounds that had been inflicted upon him by the god's bones healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. The ghastly curls on his skin were restored to their original smoothness in an instant. 3,000 miles of purple qi in one's hand, 12 towers in one's sight. Mr. Nian guffawed. This is the pinnacle of martial arts. This is the gap between immortal and mortal. Although I'll have to start all over again in the end, I've already touched this level. What comes after is only a process of accumulation. It's just around the corner. But for you, Yunyang, your life has come to an end. Give me your life." Although his injuries had healed, Mr. Nian was still in agony. It had not been easy for him to turn the situation around, so he was unwilling to waste any more time with Yunyang. He wanted to kill this mortal enemy quickly and return to find a secluded place to start over. Now, even killing Supreme Cloud, which he had been thinking about day and night, was nothing in the eyes of Mr. Nian, who felt that he had achieved great mastery in his cultivation base and had made great progress in his cultivation base. It was a trivial matter that could be accomplished with a single move. It doesn't matter. Mr. Nian leaped up, the ball of purple qi morphing into the shape of a purple sword. The innate sword is unstoppable. Mr. Nian let out a long hum. "Supreme Cloud, no matter how sharp your saber is, it's useless against this congenital sword." As he spoke, he was about to thrust his sword forward. However, it was at this moment, when Ji Lingxi could no longer hold herself back and was about to rush in front of Yunyang to block the attack for him, Yunyang suddenly guffawed. The divine edge in his hand disappeared and was replaced by a large lotus leaf. As the lotus leaf, which was the size of a round table, appeared, an inexplicable fragrance filled the entire Tianxian cliff. Leaping into the air, Mr. Nian, who was ready to kill, let out a cry as well. Disbelief colored his eyes. He could clearly feel that his waist seemed to have caved in. No, it should be said that the most important part of his spine and his waist had suddenly shattered. What did it mean for a person who was fighting with all his might to have his spine shattered? If an ordinary person's spine was shattered, they were destined to be paralyzed for the rest of their lives. There was no such thing as a fluke. Once a martial artist's spine was shattered, the consequences were even more severe than an ordinary person's. Their cultivation base would be destroyed immediately, and they would never be able to fight again. As for Mr. Nian, who was shattered in battle, the mystical qi that was circulating at full force had been unstoppable like a surging river, but his meridians were suddenly cut off. It was the most important connection point of his body. It was gone, gone. Then, where was the mystical qi going? Obviously, Mr. Nian's tragedy did not end there. It was far more than that. He could also feel that a piece of his neck bone seemed to have shattered as well. His spine was broken as well. His brain and upper body had lost contact. The connection between his brain and his limbs had been severed. The surprises came one after another. At the same time, a part of his chest caved in, and his right calf exploded into a mist of blood. His tibia was gone as well. Mr. Nien had sprung up in a domineering manner, but he had lost control of his body in midair when his murderous aura was at its peak. He had completely lost control. At this point, the situation had truly reversed. Yunyang lifted his head slowly, his cold gaze trained on Mr. Nien as he said faintly, "Mr. Nien, did these 4 pieces of God's bones give you enough of a taste?" Mr. Nien's profound cultivation base and a warrior's instinct caused him to freeze in midair, but his mind was completely blank. There was nothing else in it. After a brief moment of absent-mindedness and confirming that he had completely lost the violent force, Mr. Nien regained his clarity of mind. He chuckled bitterly and murmured, "I see. So this is the reason why you returned God's bones. What a stroke of genius, settling the cauldron with a single stroke." He guffawed. "I've always prided myself on being unparalleled in my schemes and wisdom, but when it comes to you, Supreme Cloud, I've always fallen into your grasp. This defeat is not undeserved, I die with no regrets." Before his words echoed in the air, Mr. Nien's body fell from midair. Just as he landed on the ground, a mist of blood erupted. Mr. Nien's blood vessels were completely destroyed due to the internal explosion of the mystical qi in his meridians. Almost every pore on his body was spitting thin strands of blood. Without the restraint of his meridians, the unprecedentedly powerful force that erupted from the many gods' bones had nowhere to vent in his body. Naturally, his body collapsed completely. It was like a flash flood that was initially surging forward along the river. Although the river was in a precarious position, it was still within a controllable range. As long as the river was slowly guided, it could cross safely. However, after it had rushed past the river, there was suddenly no more river ahead. There was only a narrow rocky beach. The gushing river would only have one choice: it would drown the rocky beach completely and collapse it. Even if it was actually a dam in front of him, what would be the result if the entire Yangtze River's water was forcefully poured into a small dam? It was obvious. It was obvious that this was Mr. Nien's current situation. What was more tragic was that, his body had been divided into 3 parts due to the sudden shattering of God's bones and the rampaging divine power. His lower body, upper body, and head. Each of them bore the brunt of the impact that was hundreds of times stronger than his own strength. He lay limp on the ground, unable to move. There was only a bitter smile on his face. He lifted his head with effort and looked at Yunyang, his eyes filled with endless confusion. "Why? How did you do it? It's been a long time since I've worked like this. I feel like I'm dying." Chapter 861. Yunyang smiled faintly. "Obviously, this is a trap." Perplexed, Mr. Nien asked, "Plot?" "It's obvious." "That's right. This is a trap that I've meticulously set up, one that targets the core of the 4 Seasons Tower." Yunyang said softly, "The first key to forming this plan is the complete annihilation of the 4 Seasons Tower. Completing this with your cooperation would be the best use of your talents." Mr. Nien smiled sadly and said self-deprecatingly, "I've always cooperated well." He could not help but heave a long sigh as he spoke. "Think about it, with your strength, if you want to escape and hide, it's too easy. The world is vast, and if I want to find all of you one by one, it would be no different than finding a needle in a haystack. It's even to the extent that even if I annihilate all of you, I'm afraid I'll still have to constantly wonder if there are any fish that escaped the net. But if you make a move, then the so-called fish that escaped the net will absolutely not exist." Another key factor that contributed to this was the gods' bones of sword, snow, frost, and ice. I'm sure that you'll try your best to retrieve the god's bone at some point in time. In fact, I have been waiting for this opportunity. And your action of burying the corpses is the best coordination for me. So, this is a trap where you provide the best cooperation. Yunyang said, I've told you everything about my plan. I just want to know if Mr. Nian will keep his promise and tell me the location of God's grave. Mr. Nian's mouth was already foaming with blood. Viscous blood flowed out of his mouth slowly as he said, Of course I have to tell Lord Supreme Cloud. Since you've won, these should be yours. He looked at Yunyang, a strange expression in his eyes. It seemed to be pity, it seemed to be viciousness, but it was all gone in a flash. He guffawed and said, The god's grave is in the air behind the Four Seasons Tower's headquarters. As long as mystical chi is channeled to support 3 fulcrum points in 3 directions, the god's grave can be opened. Ha ha ha. God's bones fuse with the body, the heavenly path opens, invincible under the heavens, become an immortal. Yunyang, these are all yours. Mr. Nian chuckled. His voice grew fainter and fainter. Finally, he flashed a smile. Four Seasons downfall. Ha ha ha. Four Seasons Tower. Ha ha ha. I've lost, after a dozen or so sentences, he lost. His head tilted to the side and there was no more sound. However, his body was still convulsing. The power of the god's bone was still wreaking havoc. After a long while, with a loud bang, Mr. Nian's body turned into minced meat and disappeared from the world. At the same time, an unparalleled power slowly spread out in the forest. The source of the power was none other than the 54 pieces of God's bones on the ground. Every piece was sparkling and translucent, snow-white, and sparkling. The Four Seasons Tower had only collected these few pieces of God's bones after so many years. There were far more bones in the human body. If God's bones were truly transformed from the human body, the Four Seasons Tower's collection over the years would only amount to a fraction. Yunyang looked. Looking, he, Yun, and God, Yun, Yun. He Yang. Looking, he Yun, Yun, he. After a while, Yunyang turned around and realized that Ji Lingxi was staring at him in a daze. Seeing that Yunyang was looking at her, Ji Lingxi flashed a radiant smile and said, Congratulations, you've finally avenged your grudge. Yun. Yang. Yun Yun. 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 He raised his head and faced the sky. He closed his eyes and remained motionless for a long time, not uttering a single word. Everything he had experienced in the past few years flashed before his eyes like clouds and flowing water. Supreme Earth, Supreme Wood, Supreme Water, Supreme Flame, one by one, the familiar faces drifted past him with a smile on their faces and went far away. Ji Lingxi stared at Yunyang's face in a daze. It was as if the vicissitudes of life had appeared on Yunyang's face in this short span of time. It was impossible. Yunyang had experienced so much at his age, but how could he have experienced such vicissitudes? In spite of this, Ji Lingxi knew that she was not mistaken. When do you plan to explore God's grave? Ji Lingxi asked, raising her voice. Yunyang was in a strange state. Ji Lingxi did not want to disturb him, but she had to interrupt his thoughts. Yunyang paused for a moment before replying softly, We have to go there. Only by going there can our cultivation in this world be considered complete. Before that, however, I plan to stay here for a few days. It's good to rest here for a few days. Although we've won the battle, we've exhausted a lot of our physical and mental energy. We should rest well for a few days. Right, do we need to inform Marshal Fu that we're safe? Ji Lingxi said. Yunyang was silent for a moment before he replied, No need. The formation here is complete. As long as the eye of the formation isn't destroyed from the inside, it's hard to destroy it from the outside. Mr. Nian's actions are actually a good thing. When we leave, I'll reinforce the foundation of this formation so that it's everlasting and unbreakable. From now on, I don't want anyone to come to Tianxian Cliff. I understand. I'll help you set it up and perfect the formation later. Ji Lingxi nodded in understanding. That night, Yun Yang was still sleeping in the Temple of Nine Supremes as usual. He had lain down very early this morning, and not long after, Ji Lingxi could hear Yun Yang's even breathing. He had fallen asleep. There was an indescribable sense of relaxation on his sleeping face. There was also the eagerness to report to his brothers, like a child who was eager to show off. As she watched, Ji Lingxi could not help but reveal a lot of gentleness on her face. Despite her limited knowledge, she still understood how difficult Yun Yang's journey had been. It was as if he was treading on thin ice. It was like dancing on the tip of a knife or walking on a tightrope on a cliff. It was 100 times more dangerous than this. To avenge his brothers, Yun Yang had risked his life and racked his brains. For the sake of Yutong, Supreme Cloud had given everything he could. As a citizen of Yutong, Yun Yang had done his best. As a brother, he had done his best as well. In Ji Lingxi's eyes, Yun Yang had done his best as a man. Ji Lingxi firmly believed that the name Yun Yang, Supreme Cloud, would be passed down in the land of Tianxian continent forever, becoming an irreplaceable legend and myth. Yun Yang had truly fallen asleep, completely relaxed and in deep slumber. Although he had lain down very early, he did not expect himself to fall asleep so quickly. He thought that he would have to toss and turn for a while, but just as he lay down, an inexplicable drowsiness hit him. Yun Yang drifted off without any resistance. He had a dream in his sleep. Chapter 862. In the dream, the Nine Supremes brothers had reunited. Supreme Earth and Supreme Water had taken off their masks. Supreme Earth still looked like the eldest prince of Yutong that Yun Yang had seen in the painting, while Supreme Water was a valiant and beautiful lady. Only when she occasionally glanced at Supreme Earth did she reveal a faint hint of gentleness. There was also Supreme Gold and Supreme Wood, but their faces were blurry, barely discernible. Supreme Flame had taken off his mask as well. Yun Zuyu, whom he had not seen for a long time, was sitting beside him. Both of them were smiling happily. On the other side, Supreme Wind and Yu Rolan were sitting together as well, raising their cups and inviting Yun Yang with a smile. Yun Yang, you're quite skilled, aren't you? A virgin like you has seduced my younger sister. Let me tell you, if you don't take good care of her, I promise I won't beat you to death, but I'll beat you at least 8 times a day. I'm not joking. Supreme Thunder, who was sitting close to Supreme Wind, interrupted, well said. Your younger sister is my younger sister. Remember to call me when you teach OL 9th a lesson. I'll teach him a lesson for you. Me too, me too. Supreme Flame guffawed. Fire rides the wind, wind aids the fire. How can I not be part of your attack? Supreme Wind guffawed, his face beaming with pride. Yu Rolan looked at him in rebuke and said, Humph, you're so full of yourself. You don't know how well Yun Yang treats Lingxi, unlike some people who left without a trace, without conscience or responsibility. He watched as his younger sister and I searched all over the continent, going through so much hardship and almost dying, yet he still didn't come out. Now, he has the cheek to blame others. What a joke. If you could treat me half as well as Yun Yang treats Lingxi, I'd wake up laughing even in my dreams. Humph. Before Yu Rolan could finish her words, Supreme Wind was already embarrassed, the pride he had earlier gone without a trace. Yun Zuyu, who was also reminded of her sad past, snorted and looked at Supreme Flame. Supreme Flame was drenched in sweat at once, begging for mercy. He no longer mentioned working together with Supreme Wind, Wind and Flame, and so on. The rest of the brothers were amused. They held it in at first, but in the end, it triggered a roar of laughter. Supreme Blood looked at Yun Yang and asked softly, Father, Yun Yang's expression darkened. Supreme Blood's expression dimmed immediately, clearly having guessed something. After a while, it was Supreme Earth who suggested, "Let us toast to the old master together." The brothers raised their glasses in unison. At this moment, someone said, "Why don't you just invite the old man out to toast to Dad?" Then, in the next moment, an old man with a face full of wrinkles appeared at the door. His face was filled with an amiable smile. The brothers cried out in surprise, "Dad!" Yunyang even shed tears of happiness. Looking at his father whom he had not seen for a long time, he grinned foolishly, not knowing what to say. After a long time, he finally found the chance to say, "Brothers, the Four Seasons Tower." The brothers guffawed. "If we had known, we would have been waiting for you to boast about it. It must have been tough on you to hold it in for so long. However, if you didn't manage to end the Four Seasons Tower and think that we'll let you off, we would have beaten you up 8 times over." Yunyang guffawed, tears streaming down his cheeks. Suddenly, he roared, "All of you still want to beat me up? I should be the one beating you bastards." The brothers tilted their heads and looked at him with a grin. Each of them crossed their arms and said teasingly, "Great. How many do you want to beat up? We'll fulfill your wish." Then, their gazes were filled with malice as they rubbed their palms together and chuckled. "We're more than happy to fulfill this wish of yours. We couldn't ask for more." Yunyang's eyes darted around and he turned to escape, laughing as he ran. Not long after, he was held down by his brothers. The few of them pressed on him like a human pyramid. Yunyang begged for mercy as he laughed, tears of happiness still streaming down his cheeks. Ji Lingxi watched Yunyang's face as he slept soundly. She was beaming like a silly fool, but her eyes could not stop tearing up as she mumbled, "That's great, that's great." Ji Lingxi could not help shuddering when she heard him. She stared at Yunyang in a daze for a moment before gently wiping away his tears and sighing softly. "You've met your brothers in your dream, haven't you? After this dream is fulfilled, the obsession that you've accumulated over the years should be gone by now, shouldn't it? I hope that you can live an easier life in the future." The next morning, Yunyang felt refreshed when he woke up, his body brimming with endless energy. His spirit was 100 times more energized, and even his mind was exceptionally clear. He was in perfect condition. He squinted his eyes, relishing everything that had happened in his dream. The corners of his lips could not help curling up slightly. He remembered the question that he had asked subconsciously when everyone was about to leave. "Brothers, will we be able to gather together again?" The brothers guffawed in unison and turned to leave amidst their laughter, disappearing into the hazy clouds. There was no answer to this question. However, Yunyang did not feel bad. He cried in his dream and woke up with a smile. Perhaps, this could be considered a form of perfection. Ji Lingxi heard Yunyang's murmurs that sounded like he was talking in his sleep and saw that he had woken up immediately. Ji Lingxi asked curiously, "What were you chanting just now?" Yunyang smiled but did not answer. In the end, the brothers' silhouettes disappeared into the clouds, but their voices could still be heard clearly. They clapped their hands together and sang loudly together. "Heaven and earth split the universe, water and fire, the 5 elements, rule the world. With the wind, you rule the world, rise to the 9th level and become the supreme." Their voices grew softer and softer. When the last syllable was heard, the dream returned to an endless silence. Yunyang took out a lot of food and wine from his ring. For the next 8 days, he ate and stayed in the temple. When he was full and drunk, he slept. When he woke up and moved around for a while, he ate and drank again. For 8 whole days, he did nothing else other than chatting with Ji Lingxi. He did not cultivate, he did not think, he did not analyze Yutong's situation, and he did not pay attention to the external war. On this cliff that was completely cut off from the rest of the world, he spent 8 days carefree without any worries. It was a pity that he had only had a long dream on the first day. The rest of the time, he really just slept. There was not even a single dream where he had the intention to turn his imagination into reality. It was unknown if he was lucky or not, but the quality of his sleep during these 8 days was surprisingly good. It was to the extent that Ji Lingxi felt that Yun Yang seemed to have put on some weight. Actually, it was understandable that he had put on some weight. After all, these few days had almost returned to the state when Yun Yang had the reputation of being a glutton. 8 days later, Yun Yang tidied up the Temple of 9 Supremes for the last time and set up a secret formation around the temple. He stood in front of the temple for a long time before he suddenly stood up and laughed, turning to leave without looking back. With the wind, I rule the world, rise to the 9th level and become the Supreme. He smiled and held Ji Lingxi's hand, descending the mountain in a relaxed manner. He did not turn back at all. Chapter 863. Both of them descended the mountain. Ling Xiaozui, Du Guchou, and Jun Moyan were right in front of them. When the trio saw Yun Yang and his companion, they were initially anxious, but they relaxed at once. "Where's Mr. Nian? Where are the Four Seasons Tower's men?" the trio asked in unison. Yun Yang and Du Guchou's safe return was already an indication of the battle's outcome, but they could not help but be doubtful, so they asked for more details. Yun Yang smiled. "From now on, there will be no Four Seasons Tower in Tianxian continent. There will be no Mr. Nian either." The trio heaved a long sigh of relief. "Dead? All of them? That's great." Then, he was shocked. "You killed all of them by yourself?" The instant these words left his mouth, the eyes of the 3 experts went round and wide. They were filled with disbelief, incredulity, and disbelief. "I was just lucky." Yun Yang smiled. "It's not worth mentioning, it's not worth mentioning." Jun Moyan coughed and rolled his eyes at the sky, murmuring, "What a show-off." Ling Xiaozui and Du Guchou spluttered at the same time. Based on their estimation, the Four Seasons Tower's manpower was more than enough, even with Jun Moyan's help. It would still be difficult to kill them, but it would be extremely difficult for them to defeat the enemy or even break out of the siege. Which one of them was not an expert who had shocked the world? They were all the pinnacle of this world. Jun Moyan shook his head, speechless, and said, "Since Supreme Cloud is fine, I shall not stay any longer. I shall take my leave. The worldly matters have been settled. Everyone, let us meet again in the bound of universe." Once he finished speaking, he turned and left, his green silhouette disappearing into the distance in the blink of an eye. Only his voice could be heard from afar. Green robes and green blades cross 1,000 mountains, Jun Moyan with a sword in hand, Ling Xiaozui and Du Guchou chuckled subconsciously as they watched Jun Moyan's retreating silhouette. "This fellow is similar to your disciple," said Ling Xiaozui. Du Guchou shook his head. "Don't think too highly of me. I'm afraid of falling to my death. If my disciple were half as successful as him, I wouldn't have such a headache. Sigh, I'm so unreliable, yet I've taught an equally unreliable disciple. Don't mention it, it's so annoying." Ling Xiaozui chortled. "Yun Yang, what do you plan to do next?" "I plan to settle some matters at the Four Seasons Tower's headquarters later. After that, he had to make a trip to the 7-Star Lake. After that, I'll prepare to head to the bound of universe," Yun Yang answered after some thought. "All right. Since that's the case, we'll head over to the Xianhuang world first. I'll go over there first and set up an advance for you." The two of them spoke at the same time. After they finished speaking, they looked at each other and burst into laughter. "All right. See you in Xianhuang." See you in Xianhuang. Like Jun Moyan, the 2 experts turned and left without any hesitation. They left with a peace of mind. The Four Seasons Tower had been annihilated. With Yun Yang's capability, there was no longer anyone who could stand up to him in this world. He was absolutely invincible. What else was there to worry about? Yun Yang met Fu Baoguo and left with Ji Lingxi after a brief exchange of words with him. Are you returning to Tiantang City, sir? Everything is fine. Do you have any plans for the future, Lord Supreme Cloud? Yes, I will carefully observe this world and watch it become better and better. Yun Yang smiled and disappeared into the distance with Ji Lingxi. Fu Baoguo frowned, unable to grasp the true meaning of Yun Yang's words. Had he left? Or had he decided to stay? He did not know, however. Fu Baoguo still knew one thing. The legend of the 9 Supremes, the legend of Supreme Cloud, would be passed down for a long time and would never disappear. The news of Supreme Cloud's victory at Tianxian Cliff was swiftly relayed to Tiantang City. Immediately, the entire Yutong was in an uproar. Every household knew about it and cheered in joy. For a moment, every household was decorated with lanterns and firecrackers, congratulating Supreme Cloud for chasing away Nian. The 4 armies were unprecedentedly spirited after receiving the news. Supreme Cloud is invincible. These 6 words seemed to possess a magical power that could create a legend. Every time they went to war, shouting these words seemed to increase their combat prowess. In addition, the enemy's morale was even lower. Supreme Cloud's feats were known throughout the world. Among the 4 noble families, the 4 young masters were all excited as they listened to others' stories in high spirits. Then, they returned to their own courtyards and practiced with all their might. Boss, when can we follow behind you again? Residents of Yun, Lao Mei, Fang Mafei, and Bai Shue were emotional, but they did not speak for a long time. Then, they practiced with all their might as well. Young master, we will meet again in the bound of universe. A few days later, Yun Xiaoyao asked for permission to depart after careful consideration. Supreme Cloud's achievements were unparalleled. This was known to all and needless to say, but the world had never been unified in his hands after all. As his father, it's understandable that I'm determined to accomplish this on his behalf. Yutong's higher-ups expressed their understanding of Yun Xiaoyao's feelings. Everyone knew that Supreme Cloud would probably never return to Tiantang City again. Supreme Cloud's intention to retire was already clear that day. Now that the 4 Seasons Tower was destroyed, it was a foregone conclusion that Supreme Cloud would never appear in the world again. His Majesty, the Emperor of Yutong, readily accepted the advice and appointed Yun Xiaoyao as the Marshal of the world's military, to control all the armies in the world. Then, he ordered Yu Qianquan to be the crown grandson. As the nation celebrated, there were still Qiu Jianhan and other higher-ups who understood how powerful Yun Yang's last words were and what kind of profound meaning it contained. I will watch this world become better and better. This sentence made Baoer's throne, which had already been stabilized, even more secure. It was like a nail had been nailed into the coffin. It also started from this month onwards. Yutong had truly begun its journey of conquering the world and conquering the world. Today, all the powerful enemies who had coveted Yutong had been crippled by Supreme Cloud. The path to unifying the world had undoubtedly become much smoother. At this time, Yun Yang had already arrived at the 4 Seasons Tower's headquarters. Yun Yang was not at all impatient along the way from Tianxian Cliff to the 4 Seasons Tower's headquarters. Perhaps, it should be said that he was on a sightseeing tour. Yun Yang and Ji Lingxi had taken a good tour of the Tianxian continent's beautiful rivers and mountains, the picturesque martial world. Along the way, their feelings for each other deepened. Ji Lingxi's smile did not fade. Her cultivation base had maintained its original progress as well. As time went by, it grew stronger and stronger as if there was no end to it. The gap between her and Yun Yang was even wider than before. Are you still dreaming these few days? Asked Yun Yang. Of course I am. The dreams are always so blurry, it's hard to see clearly, Ji Lingxi answered with a frown, troubled. She seemed to be haunted by the same dream all this time. However, it was vague and indistinct. She had been troubled by this for a long time. This was what it meant to be haunted by dreams. Actually, you really don't have to worry about it. Maybe your cultivation base isn't there yet. When your cultivation base is high enough, you'll probably be able to see it clearly. Yun Yang comforted her. Lingxi, we've been together for so long, but I don't think I've ever seen your real face. Ji Lingxi snorted and said, do you think I'm not pretty now? And Chapter 864. Yun Yang grinned. You were the one who kept shouting that you wanted to revert to your original appearance. Now that you've stopped, can't I have my doubts? Ji Lingxi snorted. She lifted her head and clasped her hands behind her back as she skipped forward. She looked very happy, but her words were arrogant as she said, I'm actually worried for you. I'm afraid that you'll be mesmerized by my true appearance. What should you do then? Yun Yang pursed his lips and said indifferently, this young master has seen countless people. I've seen plenty of peerless beauties and beauties. How dare a young girl like you boast that I'll be mesmerized? What a joke. Ji Lingxi skipped forward with her hands behind her back. No matter what you say, I won't let you see. Do it if you can. Yun Yang sighed with a palm to his forehead, speechless. Do it? How do I do it? Once I do it, I'll lie down. When both of them first met, Ji Lingxi had disguised herself. Not only that, she had even worn a mask. Later on, when she moved into the Yun residence, she still wore a mask. It was the same even when she left Tiantang City to look for Ji Lingfeng for the first time. When she finally came back the second time, she was chased by Lei Dongtian. To avoid his lust, she had no choice but to disguise herself as Wu Yin, the ugly girl. Even when she went to Yun Yang's house, she did not remove her disguise. Yun Yang had applied the ointment directly, concealing her appearance completely. When the crisis had been averted, Ji Lingxi could not help wanting to remove her disguise in advance. She had been searching for the antidote, but to no avail. Now that the time limit of the ointment was almost over, Ji Lingxi was no longer in a hurry. She had even prepared a new disguise, obviously preparing to apply another layer of it after Yun Yang's ointment wore off. She had no intention of showing her true face. No matter how intelligent and talented Yun Yang was, he still could not understand what kind of mentality this was. Did they not say that a woman would disguise herself for the man she liked? Why was this girl always different from what others thought? Lingxi, to tell you the truth, I can actually concoct the antidote easily. Yun Yang chuckled and said, look, Lingxi, I treat you differently. I don't even know what you look like and I already like you. I'm not judging a book by its cover, am I? Ji Lingxi snorted, looking non-committal. I'm not captivated by your beauty, you know that, right? Humph. Get rid of your disguise first. Let me see what my wife looks like, said Yun Yang. When we get to the bound of universe, we'll have to separate from each other in the beginning. If I don't recognize you when we meet in the future. Wouldn't that be a joke? Ji Lingxi lifted her chin and said, it was a stroke of luck. That's exactly what I plan to do. When the time comes, I'll revert to my original appearance and seduce you. If you dare to fall for it, you'll be a scumbag. Yun Yang pulled a long face. What if I'm not tempted? Of course, even if you're not satisfied with me. You don't like people like me. I have no interest in it, so why would I miss it? Ji Lingxi replied matter-of-factly. Yun Yang asked carefully, do you wish for me to look down on you, or do you wish for me to be a jerk? Ji Lingxi rolled her eyes. Just follow your heart. Whether you look down on me or become a jerk, I'll accept reality. I've never been one to resign myself to fate. Yun Yang cried into the sky in agony, Ji Lingfeng. Come out and King control your sister. How can I live like this? Are you trying to force me to my death? Ji Lingxi chuckled. It's useless even if you call him out. He didn't dare to control me since we were young, and he can't do so now. Do it yourself if you're so capable. Yun Yang sighed miserably, his face full of despair. Yun Yang refused to give up, coaxing and pestering Ji Lingxi with every possible way, but Ji Lingxi refused to agree to it. You may have 1,000 tricks up your sleeve, but I have a set of rules. He could only give up helplessly in the end. All right. I'll let you see it on our wedding night. Ji Lingxi added with a blushing face. Yun Yang closed his eyes and murmured, by then, not only will I be able to see your face, I'll be able to see everything else as well. In spite of this, his words triggered Ji Lingxi's rage and a terrifying pursuit that spanned tens of thousands of miles. Yun Yang could not defeat Ji Lingxi at all now. Not only was his cultivation base inferior, but he was also at a disadvantage in terms of reasoning. If it was not for Ji Lingxi's sense of propriety and refraining from killing her own husband, she would not be able to escape the crime of murdering her future husband. Is this the Four Seasons Tower's headquarters? Ji Lingxi looked at the houses on the peak, feeling rather incredulous. As the base of the world's top force, this was too shabby. It was an ordinary straw hut. Looking at it, the square rooms, the side rooms, the kitchen, everything was no different from an ordinary commoner's home. The only difference was that the distance between them was slightly greater and the location was on a high cliff that was rarely visited by ordinary people. When he arrived at the Four Seasons Tower's headquarters, he looked around and confirmed that there was a house every 500 feet. There were courtyards, flowers, halls, bedrooms, and even kitchens and toilets in the houses. There was everything that one could think of. It was a place where one lived in a home. However, there was not a single person in any of the houses at the moment. The empty mountain was silent. A formless sense of desolation crept into the air. In some of the smaller courtyards, flowers and plants were swaying in loneliness, as if waiting for their owners to return. I didn't expect the Four Seasons Tower's men to be ascetic cultivators as well. Yun Yang said with a sigh, come to think of it, if they couldn't endure such desolation and loneliness, how could they have achieved such earth-shattering cultivation base, ability, and skills? Be it good or evil, since the beginning of time, all the strong and skilled cultivators have been the same. To obtain the ability to reign above all, one has to pay an equivalent price. Being invincible is the loneliest. It's the same in reverse. In this world, no one has given more than you, so naturally, no one will receive more than you. It's fair, it's really fair. Yun Yang looked at the scene calmly. The dead are gone, the grudge is over. May everyone have a safe journey. Yun Yang spent 2 hours to find the track concealing illusory formation that had been set up in this place. The moment he removed the last piece of the formation's ice stone, there was a sudden fluctuation in the sky. Boundless spiritual qi suddenly overflowed, and a pitch-black hole actually appeared in the sky. It could be clearly seen that it was a passage that led to an unknown place. It was enigmatic and mysterious. You wait here for now. I'll go in and take a look, said Yun Yang. You must be careful. Ji Lingxi said nervously, who knows, there might be some kind of trap set by Mr. Nian here. People like you are used to having a backup plan. Maybe his last attack is here, Yun Yang chuckled. You're right. Mr. Nian's last attack really exists here. However, I'll take it on safely. I'll be fine. Ji Lingxi's eyes were as round as saucers. You knew it all along, but you still took the risk. That day, we had a family debate about women being unreasonable and my daughter-in-law said 2 famous sayings. I think these 2 sayings will benefit me for the rest of my life. The first one was, when you can win by being unreasonable, why would you be so foolish to reason and allow yourself to be convinced? The second one was, why would you reason with a man when you know that you will be at a disadvantage? After listening to these two sayings, Chapter 865. Yunyang smiled and patted Ji Lingxi's head, saying, "There's no risk involved. Don't worry, I'm not Mr. Nian, nor am I from the Four Seasons Tower. With a different mindset, the way we handle things is different. Mr. Nian's ultimate move is useless against me." Ji Lingxi flung his hand aside angrily and said, "I'm warning you seriously for the last time. Don't touch my head like this in the future. Be careful that I don't slap you." Yunyang asked, "Then may I ask, how should I touch you so that you won't slap me?" "You should." Ji Lingxi was suddenly stunned. Her embarrassment turned into anger as she said, "Scram." Yunyang laughed and glanced at her blushing face once more. Without lingering any longer, he slipped into the black tunnel as well. Venerable Lord Frost and the others had said that there was a time limit to entering this tunnel. If one did not come out after the time limit, he would be sealed inside forever. Yunyang remembered this reminder very clearly. But he had still come. Because, if I were to die one day, I would never wish for anyone to use my bones for cultivation. These corpses were once the masters of the world. Just to show my respect to these masters, I should return these gods' bones to their rightful owners. I shouldn't let them be tainted by the mortal world again and be tainted by others. At this moment, Yunyang was sprinting in the tunnel at the fastest speed he could muster. What baffled him was that ever since he entered this tunnel, the feeling he got from this place was not only different from what Mr. Nian had said, but it was also completely different from what Venerable Lord Frost and the others had said. Legend had it that it would be difficult to move forward after entering. Legend had it that one would be plagued with hallucinations and one would be devoured by internal demons if one was not careful, resulting in death. Legend had it that one's vision would be impaired after entering. Although it was not that one could not see anything, one could only see a dilapidated god's grave in front of one and a set of god's bones in it. As for the rest, one could not see them clearly at all. One could only see the blurry scene nearby and could not see anything further. In spite of these legends, Yunyang did not feel anything at all when he entered. Not only was it not difficult to move forward, but it was also unusually smooth. There were no hallucinations or visual obstructions. Could it be that the rumors were wrong? Yunyang did not notice that Emmy was swaying slowly in his deific consciousness when he entered this space. The karmic energy of good and evil that he had been collecting for the past few years was slowly dispersing. In just a short period of time, it had already filled the entire space. That was the purest justice in the world. Wherever it passed, all the haze retreated. The entrance of the cave in the distance was clearly illuminated. Although the destination was far away, reaching it was only a matter of time. With Yunyang's current cultivation base and ability, the journey would only take a breath's time if he sprinted at full speed. Although Yunyang felt that something was not right with the current atmosphere, the light was right before his eyes. How could he not enter? Yunyang stepped out of the passageway and entered the realm of light before him. Yunyang, on the other hand, felt a blinding white light in front of him, but it was not too blinding. He could still see when he focused his gaze. As he looked around, he realized that the space he was standing in seemed to have no end. God's bones were scattered everywhere, glowing white. It was obvious that the white light that entered his eyes just now came from the many God's bones here. At the same time, an inexplicable pressure enveloped the mysterious space above Yunyang. It was as if it could fall at any time and crush everything in this space into dust, without exception. Yunyang did not dare to be careless. He gathered his strongest force to be safe in case of any sudden accidents. At the same time, he spread his deific consciousness to investigate everything in this space. Other than the god's bones, there were basically only tombstones left in this space. However, the tombstones were tattered and broken, so he could not make out what was written on them. Yun-yang could not help being dumbfounded. The tombstones were so broken that there were no clues. It was difficult to determine which corpse the god's bones belonged to. Furthermore, there were more than 12 gods' graves in this space. It was easier said than done to achieve the original intention of returning the god's bones to the god's grave. As Yun-yang's thoughts raced, he chuckled bitterly. Not to mention those that were far away, just the number of gods' tombs in front of him was probably more than 240. The theory of the 12 celestial beings' bones was absurd and nonsensical. What Yun-yang did not notice was that ever since he entered this space, the light in this space had been growing brighter and brighter, as if something was brewing. Standing in this mysterious space, Yun-yang was stunned for a moment. He had thought of many scenarios in the beginning, including the traps and dangers in the god's grave, but he did not harbor any ill intentions. He only wanted to return the god's bones, so he had always thought that this trip was easy. However, the current situation did not seem to be dangerous, but it was hopeless to achieve his original intention as well. He could not help but chuckle bitterly. After a while, Yun-yang took out the god's bones from his ring and slowly placed them on the ground before him. He prayed softly, "I have no other intentions in coming here, I only want to return the remains of the seniors. I wanted to return them to their original owners, to be perfect. It's a pity that things don't go as I wish. This junior really can't differentiate more. The spirits of the seniors are not ignorant, I believe you won't blame me for this. Yun-yang is also a cultivator. Putting myself in your shoes, we're the proudest bunch of people. The higher the cultivation base of a cultivator, the prouder he is, and the more he won't allow anyone to blaspheme him. Seniors, when you were alive, every single one of you was an all-powerful figure, someone who stood at the top of the 9 heavens. Even if you died without feeling anything, I do not wish for your remains to be desecrated by those with ill intentions. There's no other reason. This is the dignity of the strong that I can empathize with. When the seniors were alive, they defended their own dignity and no one dared to offend them. Now that the seniors have passed away, it's up to us, the latecomers, to protect the seniors' dignity. When I first heard of the god's bones, I wanted to protect them. Today, I've finally achieved my goal. This is how my heart feels. I only wish that all of you rest in peace here, that your spirits are not ignorant, that your god's bones return to their rightful places and return to their original bodies. From now on, you will be isolated from the world and live in peace. Yun-yang murmured to himself for a while before he bowed deeply and turned to leave. Returning the god's bones was his original intention. Although it had not been fulfilled, this trip was not in vain. Chapter 866. Yun-yang was taken aback, thinking to himself, why? Didn't I explain it clearly enough just now? He was stunned for a moment, and the leisurely voice asked again, why is that? Yun-yang thought about it and said, there's no other reason. It's because all of you seniors are influential figures, each of you is a legendary presence. I may not be talented, but I acknowledge that I'm a legend in the Tianxian continent. I'm human too, and I'll die one day. He smiled faintly. If my body is to be retrieved by someone after I die and my bones are taken out piece by piece to cultivate, I can't stand it. Therefore, I think all of you seniors can't stand it either. That's why today's incident happened. It was only after the explanation that Yun-yang was struck with a sudden realization. Who was talking just now? This was a private space isolated from the rest of the world. How could there be someone talking? He had used his deific consciousness to confirm it multiple times just now. Who was the one who spoke just now? Thinking about it, Yun-yang felt a chill run down his spine, lifting his head abruptly. However, a faint sigh could be heard in the air. Following that, more sighs could be heard. It was as if hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of people were sighing at the same time in this empty, silent space. Yunyang felt chills run down his spine, goosebumps rising all over his body. The sound of wind whistling was not Yunyang's manifestation, but small whirlwinds that could be seen with the naked eye appeared before Yunyang's eyes, sweeping up the god's bones that he had just put down and moving them slowly towards the god's grave. In an instant, the remains that had been torn into pieces in the tomb of the god of sin were restored. It was still the same faint voice from before. "Thank you, young man. After so many years, there's finally someone like this. God's will is a prank, fate is a prank, but there's still a trace of kindness. In this world, justice is never lacking, and kindness never vanishes. It still exists after all. I'm comforted." The wind was gentle, and the clouds were thin. The scene before him changed inexplicably. Yunyang was shocked to realize that everything he saw had changed with a snap of his fingers. The space that was originally filled with a desolate and dilapidated atmosphere actually became tens of thousands of feet high in the blink of an eye. Auspicious clouds lingered around, dragons and phoenixes hovered. The purple air was glistening, and it was a magnificent scene. There were countless towering palaces surrounded by auspicious clouds. It was like a different world. There seemed to be countless figures appearing on the other side, but they immediately disappeared. It seemed like there were countless golden-armored immortal generals guarding the majestic palace that suddenly appeared on the horizon. A white cloud floated in front of him and suddenly transformed into an otherworldly old man. The old man had white hair and a white beard, and he looked like an immortal. With Yunyang's keen eyesight and the fact that he was an expert in cloud manifestation, he could tell at once that the elder's body was formed from the clouds of his cloud manifestation. There was not the slightest sense of reality to it, but its nature was different from his cloud manifestation ability. It was unfathomable. "Young man, you're not bad." The elder's projection sighed in the air and said, "I don't know how many years it has been, but this is the first time I've seen someone like you. Very well, your cultivation base is extraordinary, and your heart is even more so." Just as Yunyang was about to say something, like a few humble words, the elder waved his hand and interrupted him. "Young man, this old man doesn't have much time. I can only make it short, so I hope that you can listen to me quietly." Yunyang felt like he was in a dream, his heart filled with surreal illusions. The elder's voice rang again, faintly discernible. "You're right. The pride of the strong shall not be blasphemed. We've been superior people for our entire lives. How can we be content with our corpses being trampled on? What can we do even if we're not content?" He heaved a long sigh and said, "Since you're a cultivator and have reached a certain level, you should know that where there's a land, there's a sky. Where there's a land, there's a sky. The logic is simple. If there's a human in this world, then there's a celestial court. The so-called immortals are the celestial court's people who have attained Tao and become immortals. The celestial court's people control everything in the world, fortune, and everything else. This is destiny, a destiny that no one can change since the world was created. However, we, the rulers of this land, the true immortals who have attained Tao, were overthrown because of the martial world's chaos many years ago and the change in the world. Who says that destiny can't be changed? It's just that we weren't capable enough and we weren't powerful enough. The world was in chaos, but we only cared about living peacefully and didn't interfere. As a result, His Majesty was enraged, thinking that we were derelict in our duties and didn't deserve this celestial position. That day, His Majesty crossed the realm in a fit of rage. With a flick of his fingers, the celestial court ceased to exist and the land was torn apart. The celestial court's members perished in this incident. Only their corpses were left, piled up in this barren space. Even their remaining essence, chi, and spirit were extracted to maintain the good and evil of this land, to maintain the so-called bright sun. However, the essence and chi that we left behind, despite the considerable amount, is ultimately a tree without roots and water without roots. It can't be maintained for long. Today, all of our colleagues are at the end of their rope, an arrow at the end of its flight. I believe that in no more than 100 years, it'll be the final doomsday of the gods and the miracles will vanish. Everyone is buried here, buried in such a special place where wind can pass through on several sides. This place is connected to the bound of universe on one side and the Tianxian continent on the other. It can be considered as one of the few places in the world that can connect the bound of universe and the Tianxian continent. In other words, it's a transit station that connects the two realms. However, it's also because of this that our remains are in a position where they can be discovered at any time. It's also full of temptation. Because every cultivator who sees the god's bones knows that as long as they get the god's bones and fuse it into their bodies, they will have a chance to become true immortals and make great progress in their cultivation. The voice was full of desolation. We are all people above the 9 heavens, it's inevitable that we are all proud and awe-inspiring. Who would be willing to see their remains being dismantled after death and used for cultivation? Heroes of their generation, even though they are already true immortals, in the end, they will end up with nothing left of their remains. But this is the result that Lord Monarch wants us to see, the result that we personally experience. From time to time, we have to watch as our corpses are taken away and used by others. Being taken away by a group of people that we once wholeheartedly protected for cultivation, yet we can't resist in the slightest. I still remember what Lord Monarch said at that time. One day, if there is a cultivator with a pure heart who can resist the temptation of becoming immortals, and after obtaining the god's bones, chooses to send them back. At that time, it will be the day of your release. As long as this person collects all the god's bones and sends them all back, not only will the heavenly court be restored to its original state. All of you will also be able to restore your original bodies and ascend to the sky realm. Today is Alliance Master Nank's birthday, let us wish him a happy birthday. Chapter 867. Back then, we were in the middle of it all. It was our wishful thinking that the world would change and capable people would emerge. How could there be a lack of heroes in every dynasty and generation? There would never be a lack of people of true virtue. Perhaps we could be free after a few years. In the end, all of us were gravely mistaken. None of those who were fated to come to this realm could resist the temptation of becoming a true immortal. They all chose to dismantle our bodies for their own use. We endured and waited bitterly for such a person to come, but we've waited for hundreds of thousands of years. The elder in the air looked at Yun Yang expectantly. Young brother, you've listened to me from the beginning to the end of our past. This old man can also see that you're a true gentleman, a true hero. I wonder if you're willing to help us remnant souls a little more? As the elder's voice trailed off, countless silhouettes appeared in the air. Although they were blurry and only their heads could be seen, each of their gazes were fixated on Yun Yang eagerly. It was obvious that they hoped that he would agree. Yun Yang's expression did not change, but his heart was filled with shock. He did not expect God's bone to be involved in so many things. It was too complicated, the invincible legend of Tianxian continent, the God's bone that could enable one to become a true immortal, originated from the celestial court, from the true immortals of this world. What was even more frightening was that the true immortals of this world, the true immortals who stood above all the living beings of the continent, were still insignificant existences that could be easily crushed by a higher level of strength. Yun Yang had blindly assumed that becoming a true immortal meant that one would be a force of the universe. So it's all of you. So many years after your deaths, you're still maintaining this world's stability with your essence, qi, and spirit. Yun Yang sighed softly and looked up at the sky, murmuring, heroes shouldn't suffer such grievances. Even if there's a reason for it, you've all sacrificed too much in these countless years. He was silent for a moment before he said, how should I help all of you? Speak your mind. The elder was so agitated that he could not speak properly. You agree? This extreme excitement almost caused his soul body to completely dissipate. It took him a great deal of effort to stabilize himself. Yunyang nodded seriously and said with a smile, "I agree." The old man's shadow was still trembling violently. After a long while, he finally said, You're not afraid that we're just sweet words, that we have ulterior motives, or that we're using you to escape?" Yunyang's eyes were half-lidded as he said faintly, "I'm willing to do this even if it's only for the fact that the dignity of the strong should not be sullied. If you're using me, at most, I'll defeat you after you've recovered." The old man's expression turned strange as he looked at him. A moment later, he finally laughed, "Good ambition." His expression was somewhat startled as he muttered, "Is this the heart?" Just then, the elder lowered himself, his words barely audible. Yunyang did not catch them clearly anyway. However, the faces of the surrounding phantoms all revealed a look of sudden realization. All of them seemed to be lost in thought, and a sense of shame arose spontaneously. "Young man, there are a few families in the bound of universe that have similar graveyard passages," the elder said. "Once someone discovers this passage out of greed and takes away God's bones, then, it can only be completely sealed after someone returns the bones. So, as long as young friend recovers all of God's bones, you'll naturally know how to enter. Similarly, we can only rebuild the celestial court when we've collected all of God's bones and returned to being immortals. I'll leave the rest to you, young friend." Every single one of the phantoms looked ashamed. "What makes us feel the most ashamed is that, our remnant souls don't have anything that we can repay you with. Even if you really manage to return all of the godly bones to us, we still don't have anything to repay you with. We don't want to hide this from you, young friend. My original intention of returning God's bones wasn't to ask for anything in return. I'm only doing it for the pride of a jade accomplished expert. Since there's a follow-up to this, I'll do my best to help. 100 years. I'll collect all of your remains before this time limit. This is also for the welfare of Tianxian continent. Just this alone makes this trip worthwhile. Thank you." The phantoms in the sky bowed in unison. Then, all the phantoms in the sky disappeared as if they had never existed. The scene of the Jade Palace from before also instantly turned into nothingness. Only a weak voice echoed in the air, "This place isn't suitable for mortals to linger for long. Young friend, please leave quickly, lest you get hurt by the Yin Qi." When Yunyang walked out of the god's grave, he felt a little hazy. No matter how intelligent he was, he would never have thought that the source of God's bones, which Mr. Nian and the Four Seasons Tower's people yearned for, would have such a hidden secret. This was an earth-shattering secret that no human would have thought of. The Four Seasons Tower's wish is to collect all of God's bones, hoping to become a true immortal and even be ranked among the immortals. What they don't know is that it's impossible to become a true immortal by relying on God's bones. Even if they succeed, they'll only fall behind. As for being ranked among the immortals, that's even more absurd. There's no immortal class to speak of in this world, let alone being ranked among them. Based on this, not only is God's bones not an opportunity for the Four Seasons Tower to ascend to the heavens, it's a trap that's beyond redemption. Putting aside the fact that they'll never be able to collect all of God's bones, even if they're lucky enough to collect all of them and achieve the level of a true immortal, what they'll know in the end is a hopeless reality. There'll be no more room for advancement in their cultivation journey, only despair. The moment of success is the moment of failure. This is the most terrifying despair. Subconsciously, Yunyang recalled how the Four Seasons Tower had been working tirelessly towards this goal for so many years. The manpower, resources, financial resources, and mental effort that they had expended were too much. However, the truth was that this was the truth. It was truly depressing. Yunyang could not help sighing inwardly. Putting aside the good and evil of Mr. Nian and the others, which one of them was not a rare talent in this world? Yet, they had fallen into this irresistible maze. Once they had fallen into it, they could no longer escape. However, at the end of the day, all of this was just human greed at work. Since the beginning of time, no one had been able to resist the temptation of attaining the highest heights in this world. They had sunk deep into it, unable to extricate themselves. Mr. Nyen was indeed up to no good when he told me the location of God's grave. This is the last trap he's laid for me. However, this trap is a test of whether my heart is greedy or not. Mr. Nyen is indeed a formidable hero of his generation. He's already dead, yet he's left such a huge pit. Yun Yang recalled something. Before the final battle, Mr. Nyen did not have a single piece of God's bone. As the Four Seasons Tower's ruler, he did not have a single piece of God's bone that could allow one to ascend to immortality. What did this mean? Thinking back to today, he could not help but shudder. Chapter 868. Even if he doesn't know the truth, he has personally experienced the power of God's bone. It's very likely that he felt that God's bone isn't truly fused with his body despite its immense power. It can only increase his power temporarily, and it's impossible for him to have it permanently. If it's truly fused, then the person who collects God's bone will inevitably face a great disaster. It's only a matter of time. Perhaps this is the reason why so many people in the Four Seasons Tower possess God's bone, but only Mr. Nyen, the core Four Seasons messenger, and the 12 moons didn't fuse with God's bone to increase their power. His main intention in leading me to this God's grave was to gamble on my conscience. If I had the slightest bit of greed, my fate would have been rewritten. After all, this world may only have 100 years left to waste. There's not much time left. Although the shadow in the tomb of the god of sin did not mention the bad consequences of taking the god's bone because of greed, the bad consequences must exist. Being directly labeled as a greedy person by the true immortal of this world, and being hated by so many gods, what good ending could there be? Even if they were powerless at the moment, this rage would only accumulate, waiting for the day it would explode. How could the gods let go of people who had trampled on their corpses and bones? Even if those people were reincarnated, they would probably be dragged back and tortured harshly. Thinking of this, Yun Yang recalled the most terrifying realization of this trip, Lord Monarch's power. In the past, Yun Yang already knew that Lord Monarch, who had overturned Tianxian continent, was a master of the universe, possessing unimaginably terrifying power that the cultivators of this world could not imagine. He could only look up to him, but he had secretly thought that the so-called true immortals recorded in Tianxian continent's ancient texts were the so-called masters of this level, the masters of the universe. In spite of this, the reality he knew now was that the true immortals who had attained Tao before Tianxian continent and the bound of universe were still like ants when faced with the masters of the universe. They could still be easily overturned and crushed with a mere thought. This understanding was terrifying. It could be said to be extremely terrifying. So, the so-called masters of the universe were actually of such an unknown level. Even the word magnificent was not enough to describe them. Why do you look troubled? Did things not go smoothly? Ji Lingxi frowned and stole a glance at Yun Yang. Since Yun Yang had come out of the place, he had not said anything, but it was obvious that he had a heavy heart. His melancholy could not be concealed. Could it be that something unimaginable has happened inside? Ji Lingxi pondered, but she kept her temper to herself for the rest of the journey. She was gentle and considerate, taking good care of Yun Yang. Yun Yang was indeed considering the matter. Even if he did not consider the intergalactic powerhouses as it was still too far away, it was already rather difficult to collect the scattered gods' bones. This was because those who had obtained the gods' bones should be the prestigious families of the bound of universe. Perhaps, each family's ability would not be inferior to the Four Seasons Towers, perhaps even surpassing it by a great margin. However, where there was a will, especially when this matter concerned the survival of the Tianxian continent in the next 100 years. he had to try his best to achieve it. Unexpectedly, after pondering for a long time and frowning, he suddenly realized. The past half a day had been exceptionally comfortable. He stretched out his hands for his clothes, opened his mouth for his food, and only cared about drinking. With Yun Yang's intelligence, it was impossible that he did not know the gist of it. It was also because of his intelligence that he continued to ponder with a frown. There were not many opportunities to enjoy himself like this. Ji Lingxi did not know that he was a drama queen. She served him meticulously along the way, afraid that he would fall ill from his worries. Sigh, the hearts of the people in this world were not what they used to be. Who said that heroes and warriors did not have dirty thoughts? Where are we going? The 7-Star Lake. The 7-Star Lake. Only when I reach the 7-Star Lake will I understand what the 7-Star Lake is. Looking at the 7-Star Lake in front of him, Yun Yang sighed. This was the hometown of Mi Kongquan, eunuch Mi. He recalled what the granny had said to him before she died. Thank you for helping me and brother Kongquan to fulfill the biggest wish of our lives. As a token of our gratitude, if you are free, you can visit the 7-Star Lake. Perhaps you will gain something. Now, he had come to the 7-Star Lake. This trip was not for the granny's gratitude. It was because this would be his last stop in the Tianxian continent. The 7-Star Lake. Just as Yun Yang had said, only when one arrived at the 7-Star Lake would one understand the origin of the lake's name. Looking around, one could clearly see the 7 peaks surrounding the lake. If one were to look down from a higher vantage point, the lake would look like a dazzling pearl surrounded by mountains. It was a marvelous sight indeed. The 7 mountain peaks surrounding the 7-Star Lake were lush and verdant, and the vegetation there was especially lush. Standing at the peak, Yun Yang could only feel the lush greenery far surpassing that of other places, but other than that, he did not feel anything else. However, once he rose into the air and looked again, he immediately noticed the difference. As far as the eye could see, aside from the 7 mountain peaks surrounding the 7-Star Lake, the other mountain peaks were also lush with life. However, they were clearly lacking in vitality. Comparing the two, the difference was like the difference between heaven and earth. The two of them immediately discovered a fact. The 7 mountains around the 7-Star Lake were like an otherworldly treasure trove. Excited, the two of them went to the left and right to investigate, wanting to see what was going on. An hour later, the two of them reunited at the same spot. Although there are some treasured resources in the surrounding mountains, the quality is obviously 2 levels lower than here. That's right. The towering trees on these 7 peaks can be seen everywhere, and they are trees that require 7 to 8 people to wrap their arms around. Even the common plants that are only shrubs on other mountains have all grown into trees here. There must be something special about this 7-Star Lake. But where is this secret? Thinking of this answer, the two of them could not help but look at each other. That was because even with their eyesight, they were actually unable to see any clues or traces of what was going on. Yun Yang pondered for a moment before saying, although we still can't figure out what is strange about this place, there are at least a dozen strong auras concealed on the 7 peaks surrounding the 7-Star Lake. This is enough to explain the problem. Ji Lingxi's eyes darted around as she said, these people are probably cultivators who are familiar with the mysteries of this place and have been cultivating here for many years. It's just that each of these people's cultivation base is extraordinary, having reached the realm of Tao, but they are still far from the two of us. However, the fact that the cultivators of this place are willing to give up on roaming the martial world and stay here to cultivate, I'm afraid it's just as you said. This already speaks volumes. Ji Lingxi glanced at Yun Yang slyly. We don't have much time. Instead of slowly figuring it out ourselves, why don't we ask someone directly? It's more convenient. Yun Yang laughed heartily. You've said exactly what I'm thinking. I'll ask them right now. Ji Lingxi was about to ask, how are you going to ask them? Yun Yang sucked in a deep breath and let out a long howl. Chapter 869. The volume of Yun Yang's howl was not very loud at first, only spreading out leisurely. However, it soon soared to the 9 heavens, and a moment later, it rumbled violently in the air like thunder. For a moment, the rumbling grew louder and louder, and in an instant, it was already deafening. A moment later, it was like the roar of mountains and the roar of tsunamis, the heavens falling and the earth cracking. Golden thunder rumbled within a 1,000-mile radius, making it difficult for anyone to remain calm. After a quarter of an hour, the howl did not weaken at all. Instead, it grew even more majestic and violent. The sky above the 7 peaks was already in a state of turmoil. Thunder flashed, and lightning flashed. The strong wind howled, and wherever it passed, countless towering trees on the 7 mountain peaks were blown to the point of bowing their heads in worship. The might of this howl was so great that it had the power to shake the heavens and overturn the earth. Suddenly, with a loud bang, the water of the 7-star lake that was surrounded by the 7 peaks surged and surged thousands of feet into the sky. The torrent of water rose to an extremely high altitude, and finally exhausted itself. After a slight pause in the air, it crashed down with a loud bang. Boom! Tens of thousands of tons of lake water crashed heavily onto the surface of the 7-star lake, and the entire lake's water surged out in all directions. However, despite the commotion, the cultivators in the area still did not make a move. They were very calm. Yun Yang was not discouraged. Instead, he increased his strength, and the howl became even more majestic and high-spirited. The howl's power increased once more, and like a demonic voice that could penetrate one's brain, it charged towards the 7-star mountain in an all-encompassing manner. All the flowers and plants on the 7 peaks rose into the air due to the impact of the howl. Countless pebbles on the peaks also trembled and rolled down like a rolling drum. Finally, someone's exclamation could be vaguely heard. Amidst the flying pebbles, more than 10 silhouettes leaped out, their faces filled with pain as they flew towards Yun Yang. One of them even shouted with a twisted expression, "Stop howling." It was a pity that before the voice could travel far, it had already been turned into strands of silk by the impact of the howl and the howl. It could not be heard even if it was heard. However, since someone had come out, Yun Yang had naturally achieved his goal. He smiled faintly and immediately stopped howling. At the instant he finished speaking, the entire world was once again filled with agitated and turbulent sound waves, and everything returned to silence once more. However, the 7-star mountain, which had suffered the impact of the sound waves, was still affected by the aftermath. The mountain was still trembling, the lake was still undulating, and the wind and clouds in the sky were also turbulent. Amidst the chaos, several figures flew over. All of them were in a sorry state, and their eyes were filled with terror. The might of Yun Yang's roar had shaken the heaven and earth, and the weather had changed. Although their cultivation base was strong, they could not withstand such an all-encompassing, all-conquering, demonic voice. They could only come out to beg for mercy. At this moment, the hearts of all the cultivators here were filled with uneasiness. Who was this person? How could he be so overbearing? Especially that cultivation, it was simply not at the level that the cultivators of this world could possess. Their guess was right. Yun Yang's current cultivation base had indeed surpassed the pinnacle of this world. May I ask who you are? Why? Why is it here? This. The 12 cultivators who were cultivating in seclusion stood in front of Yun Yang, looking at the 2 people in front of them with shock and astonishment. This man and woman were really too young. They did not look like the legendary seniors at all. In a world like the Tianxian continent where the fist was the strongest, even a profound cultivator would lose his so-called demeanor once he encountered a stronger cultivator who came to pick a fight. Those with a slightly weaker state of mind would be like these people, losing their composure. It was not that they were too incompetent, but it was because Yun Yang was too strong. Yun Yang cupped his fists, and his attitude was unusually humble, even a little apologetic. He said, "It's my first time here, and I don't know the secret of the 7-star mountain. Out of helplessness, I acted rashly and invited everyone to come out for a while. This action has undoubtedly disturbed your peaceful cultivation, please forgive me." Everyone's faces were pale, and they hurriedly said that it was all right, but in their hearts, they thought, how could we not come out with such a domineering invitation? If we don't come out, we will be directly killed by the shock. With such absolute power, the strongest fist is the strongest argument. This is the iron rule of this world, and we understand it. You really don't have to apologize so hypocritically. Even if your acting is good and you appear sincere, we won't believe you, but that won't stop us from acting like we believe you. May I ask everyone, what is the secret of the 7-star lake that I have searched so many times before, but to no avail? Yunyang asked in a friendly manner. Upon hearing this, the 12 people's expressions darkened at the same time. The secret of the 7-star lake is the foundation of our cultivation here, how can we tell you so easily? The first question you ask when you arrive is actually to dig up our roots. Although it is very impressive that your cultivation base is high, as the saying goes, cutting off one's path to wealth is like killing one's parents, and cutting off one's path of cultivation is even more irreconcilable. Don't you know that? Everyone seemed hesitant. Although they were wary of Yunyang's profound cultivation base, Yunyang's question had already touched on the foundation of their cultivation, so it was difficult for them to make a decision in such a short time. Yunyang narrowed his eyes and said lightly, "It is your freedom to ignore worldly affairs and live in seclusion at the 7-star lake, and others have no right to interfere. However, the 7-star lake is located within the empire of Yutong, so it is Yutong's territory, and naturally, you are also Yutong's people. Previously, the world was in chaos, and Yutong was once in a precarious situation, facing the risk of extinction. All of you have benefited from Yutong, but you have ignored the danger of the country's destruction, and watched as Yutong's people were plunged into misery. Is this a serious crime?" Upon hearing Yunyang's words, a few of them looked ashamed, but most of their eyes were filled with disapproval. After all, to high-level cultivators, worldly conflicts were nothing to them. While Yunyang's words were reasonable, it was more of a powerful cultivator trying to incriminate them. This reputed one controls the world. If I were to behead all of you just like that, it would be inexcusable, Yunyang said lightly. Finally, someone sneered, "Controls the world? Who do you think you are?" A cold glint flashed in Yunyang's eyes as he glared at the person who spoke and said coldly, "Who do you think this reputed one is? This reputed one has battled the world, risked life and death, and has always been on the front lines. I have gone through hundreds and thousands of battles to achieve Yutong's current situation. This reputed one is Supreme Cloud of Yutong's 9 Supremes. Supreme Cloud of Yutong's 9 Supremes." The 12 people's expressions changed at the same time. Even though they had secluded themselves from the world, they knew of the unparalleled reputation of Supreme Cloud, the 9 Supremes of Yutong. If it were someone else, it would have been fine. They would always have something to say. Just the argument that high-level cultivators should not interfere in worldly conflicts was enough. However, in the face of Supreme Cloud and his meritorious contributions to Yutong, all 12 of them were speechless. Based on Supreme Cloud's contributions alone, no one would have any objections if he were to kill them on the spot, who had not contributed at all in the national war. Even if there were still people who would feel wronged, saying, "Although we did not contribute, we were only focused on cultivation and had no time to care about other things." However, there was no one in Yutong who would reason with you. When the country was on the brink of collapse, you had the ability to live in seclusion in the forest, allowing the country to be in danger and the people to be plunged into misery. To the people of Yutong now, this was a crime. An unforgivable crime. Now, this reputed one hasn't punished any of you, I only want to find out some things. Yet, not only do you all hide it because of a little bit of selfishness, you even think that I've invaded your interests. Chapter 870. That last N was accompanied by a mountain-like pressure that came crashing down. The ferocious aura was like a stormy sea crashing down on them. The 12 men felt their hearts skip a beat, as if they had suddenly been plunged into the depths of hell. Chills ran down their spines, and even their souls seemed to be trembling because of it. Only then did they realize that this Supreme Cloud was not only the Supreme Cloud of the 9 Supremes, he was also an unparalleled expert. They had never even heard of such a high-level expert. If he really wanted to kill them, it would be as easy as slaughtering chickens. The person in front coughed and said, "Actually, the secret of the 7-star lake is not worth mentioning. Since Lord Supreme Cloud has taken the initiative to ask, we will tell you everything." The others lowered their heads as well. A cold glint flashed across Yunyang's eyes. These people had lived here in seclusion during the chaos of war, not bothering themselves with worldly affairs. Their priority was, of course, peace and quiet. They did not want anyone to disturb their cultivation as they pursued the Tao wholeheartedly. However, it did not mean that they did not fear death. Now that they were threatened with death, their true natures had been forced out. Yunyang's disdain rose in his heart. With such a state of mind, how dare you pursue the Tao? It would be a great joke if you succeeded. The spiritual qi of the 7-star lake is much denser than that of other places. Cultivating here will yield twice the result with half the effort. Even compared to the legendary paradise, it is not the slightest bit inferior. The man took a deep breath and said, "In my opinion, if I cultivate here for a day, the amount of Xian qi I can accumulate is equivalent to cultivating in other places for a month. That's why I'm reluctant to leave and stay here all year round." Yunyang frowned and said, "Oh? Do you know why there is such a supernatural phenomenon here?" Looking at these people, Yunyang asked, but his heart was filled with sorrow. All the other countries knew that Yutong did not have a profound cultivator to rely on. In the past, there was only Yun Xiaoyao to hold the fort. However, the Marquis of Heavenly Clouds, the 7 steps of killing sword then, was only at the 7th peak of the peak realm. He was much weaker than many of the other countries' experts who were at the peak of the peak realm and 10th perfection. Who would have known that when Yutong's people were suffering and hundreds of millions of good men were dying in the battlefield all these years, when these ordinary people were willing to sacrifice themselves for the country and charge into the battlefield with their bravery alone? Within the empire of Yutong, there were some people who could fight against thousands and tens of thousands of men living in seclusion in the mountains and rivers, spending their days leisurely and contented, enjoying themselves in contentment. How could they not know that the flames of war had engulfed the entire continent? Since they knew about the 9 Supremes and Supreme Cloud, it was impossible for them not to know what was going on outside. However, they still chose to live in seclusion. They were clearly transcendent experts who had already attained the Tao realm. Yunyang's intention of announcing his name was more to see if these people knew about him. Yunyang even hoped that these people were truly focused on cultivation and were completely ignorant of the affairs of the world. However, the truth was that they knew. They knew everything. It was just that they had chosen to be indifferent, to watch Yutong's war and its people perish from the sidelines. The reality of the situation infuriated Yunyang. He almost lost control of himself and killed all of these fellows with his palms. We don't know the reason for the thick spiritual qi in this realm either. In fact, we've tried to investigate it but to no avail. We don't know more than you do, Lord Supreme Cloud. The person who spoke was careful with his choice of words. However, the 12 of them could still feel the intense murderous intent that lingered around Yunyang. They knew that Supreme Cloud had already decided to kill them. All of them shuddered in fear. The only peculiarity we discovered is that, the spiritual energy around the 7-star lake is exceptionally dense. Especially at night, the moonlight is exceptionally bright, and the starlight seems to be exceptionally resplendent as well. On the night of every full moon, the density of this spiritual energy doubles. In fact, we've been trying to find the source of the 7-star lake secret for so many years, but we've never been able to do so. The elder beside him sighed. Actually, if we could discover this secret earlier, we would have no more distractions. Perhaps we would have left this place a long time ago to join the War of Nations. After all, everyone is responsible for the rise and fall of the nation. We are also Yutong's people. Yunyang sucked in a deep breath. He was almost provoked to kill on the spot by those words. You know that everyone has a responsibility for the rise and fall of a nation? But do you really deserve to say those words? It was not just Yunyang. Even Ji Lingxi could not help but feel the urge to vomit after hearing the elder's words. Yunyang stood there for a while in a daze. Finally, he waved his hand weakly and said, "Forget it. Go back, all of you." He suddenly lost all interest in conversing with these people. All he wanted was for them to disappear from his sight as soon as possible. As if they had been granted amnesty, the group turned and left at once. The last one took a few steps before he suddenly turned and said with a pained expression, "Lord Supreme Cloud, we're not completely heartless people. It's just that cultivation has always been arduous and difficult, like rowing a boat against the current. If we don't move forward, we'll fall behind. It's not easy to come by such a wonderful cultivation opportunity. Who would be willing to give it up? Lord Supreme Cloud accuses us of not contributing to the nation. We have no words to refute and can only accept it with shame. But Lord Supreme Cloud doesn't know." Yunyang replied coldly, "What? I don't know what?" The man heaved a long sigh. "My family died in this war as well. This old man witnessed the tragedy with my own eyes, but I was powerless to stop it. That day, Dongxuan's army trampled over us. No matter how capable this old man was, there's still a limit to a person's strength. I can't even protect my own family, what more?" Ji Lingxi's eyes widened as she said in disbelief, "With your insignificant ability as a Dao realm cultivator, you watched as your family was massacred? You ignored it and did not care at all?" The man heaved a long sigh. This old man was alone. Even if I fought with my life on the line, could I really have shaken a 1,000,000-strong army? Ji Lingxi's face was flushed as her body trembled. Are you still human? One must know that a peak realm pinnacle cultivator's combat power was usually beyond common sense, but they were still wary of the tactic of overwhelming numbers. Once they were surrounded by an army, the chances of survival were slim. A heaven realm cultivator's combat power was a few times higher than a peak realm cultivator's, but he still could not fight a massive army head-on. Even people like Yun Xiaoyao, Bai Shue, and Fang Mafei could not turn the tide of the war despite their brilliance in the Battle of the Fortress of Resilience. In spite of this, a Dao realm cultivator's ability was already at the pinnacle of this world. Their power was beyond common sense. Even if a 10,000-strong army was deployed to surround them, they would not be able to kill them. Therefore, many dynasties in this world dared to kill heaven realm cultivators, but few dared to target Dao realm cultivators. If pushed to the extreme, a Dao realm cultivator could even slaughter an army of 10,000 on his own. Of course, such an outcome would also exhaust the cultivator's basic qi, and he would eventually fall from exhaustion or even perish. In spite of this, a Dao realm cultivator actually said that he dared not face an army head-on and that he did not even dare to help his own family. This was the biggest joke in the world. Yun Yang's eyes widened in shock when he heard the man's words. He stared at the man who was trying his best to defend himself in disbelief. How could a Dao realm cultivator whose cultivation base was already at a transcendent level in this world say so and think so? What he meant was clear: I can't even bear to watch my own family die, let alone save the country and its people. You're telling me about contributing to the country. Isn't that too funny? Here, he was talking about serving the country as his family. The reverse of the phrase, country as family, was shocking in a different sense. This person's heart was truly cold-blooded to the extreme. Yunyang was stunned for a moment before he chuckled. A cultivator cultivates his mind. The state of mind is the most difficult shackle for a cultivator to overcome. You must be feeling terrible at times since you're so regretful. The path of cultivation is destined to be bleak. Come, I'll send you to reunite with your family now. Somehow, Yunyang's murderous intent could no longer be contained. Wind and lightning rose from his palm. It was a clean and efficient slap that turned this person who was full of words of helplessness into ashes that scattered in the air. He was no different from the heavens. Chapter 871. Before this person died, he was still bewildered. What crime have I committed? After I die, who cares about the flood? Isn't this what my heart desires? Dirty my hands from killing. That's true. Yunyang waved his hand in disgust. A cloud of water vapor formed in the air and water poured down from the sky. Yunyang washed his hands but could not calm his anger. He murmured, "There's actually such a person in this world. There's actually such a person in this world. After you die, whether the flood happens or not, it has nothing to do with you. The key lies in your death, so you shall die first." Yunyang paused as if he was stunned. He asked Ji Lingxi in surprise, "Lingxi, think about it. What do you think about the talents and qualities those people displayed just now?" Ji Lingxi was dumbfounded by Yunyang's sudden question. She was stunned for a moment before she replied, "I only noticed that their cultivation base was already in the Tao realm. I didn't take a closer look at their individual states." The cultivator's qualities are extremely high. It's within reason. If they weren't exceptionally gifted, how could they have reached the Tao realm? Yunyang shook his head and said in a low voice, "Not necessarily. Although both of our abilities have long surpassed the Tao realm, our combat power is still at the Tao realm because the higher cultivation path has yet to be truly opened. That person just now, it was too easy for me to kill him. When I came into contact with him, I judged that his combat power was, at most, at the pinnacle of the heaven realm. He definitely didn't have the might of the Tao realm." Ji Lingxi was shocked. "What? You said that his cultivation base was only at the pinnacle of the heaven realm, but his aura was clearly at the level of the Tao realm." Yunyang pondered for a moment before he said, "I think that this group of people purposely pursued the advancement of their own realm and neglected everything else. Whether it's their country or their family, their own state of mind and experience, or even their own power and combat power." Ji Lingxi did not know what to say. Yunyang was exaggerating. How could it be possible? Yunyang said faintly, "A cultivator's cultivation journey prioritizes his own cultivation base, but if one's state of mind, combat power, experience, and experiences aren't in sync, the overall capability will plummet. These people have relied on their extraordinary talents and the geographical location to improve their cultivation base tremendously, but they've completely ignored their true state. How can such Tao realm cultivators be responsible? I'm being too harsh." Up in the middle of the sky, the starlight was chaotic, making the night seem especially deep. Apart from that, there didn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary. At this moment, the mountains around Seven Star Lake had already regained their former peace. Although the scenery was no longer the same, the sounds of insects and cicadas chirping could be heard everywhere, showing that life was returning. The desolation of the day was nowhere to be seen. As the breeze blew, Ji Lingxi's long, silky hair fluttered on Yunyang's face, tickling him comfortably. Yunyang was about to ask, "How long is your hair?" Suddenly, he felt as if the stars in the sky were blinking towards him. As the thought flashed through his mind, he could not help but exclaim in surprise as he lifted his head to look. In the sky, countless stars began to twinkle. In fact, it was not just the stars that filled the sky, the bright moonlight in the horizon was getting brighter as well. After a while, the bright moonlight slowly gathered, and like a beam of moonlight, it descended from the sky. Along with the appearance of the moonlight pillar, the sounds of insects and cicadas that were rising and falling in the surroundings stopped abruptly, disappearing without a trace. It seemed to have stopped due to some reason, but it also seemed to be waiting for something. Both Yunyang and Ji Lingxi knew that something was amiss, so they stared at the horizon even more intently. Yunyang had a strong premonition that the secret of Seven Star Lake lay within the moonlight and starlight. Perhaps the truth would be revealed right before his eyes in the next moment. In the next moment, the changes in the horizon became more obvious. The frequency of the twinkling stars increased by several times. In Yunyang's eyes, they had already become one. If it were not for the night sky, he would not have been able to look at them directly. Before Yunyang could be shocked, he realized that the moonlight was even brighter than the starlight, illuminating the entire sky above Seven Star Lake with layers of thin silver threads. In the blink of an eye, the entire Seven Star Lake had become the world of silver threads. The mystical silver threads that were derived from the interweaving of moonlight and starlight were like an inescapable net at this moment, without any gaps to speak of. As the net of silver threads was formed, boundless spiritual chi followed the silver threads and descended from the distant stars, pouring into the Seven Star Lake. At this moment, a pure and thick spiritual chi that was completely different from this world rapidly filled the entire Seven Star Lake. The spiritual chi was so thick and abundant that it suffocated the nostrils and mouths of those who came into contact with it. Yunyang and Ji Lingxi had cultivated in an atmosphere that was even denser with spiritual chi, but now, they could still feel the meridians throughout their bodies seemingly rejoicing due to the current spiritual chi atmosphere. Even without actively cultivating, their physical bodies were automatically absorbing the pure and thick spiritual chi that filled the air. Yunyang and Ji Lingxi dared not slack off when they saw the strange phenomenon. After quickly determining that the strange spiritual chi here was harmless to them, they cultivated their skills in unison, cultivating with all their might to refine the mystical spiritual chi in front of them. With their cultivation attainments that had long surpassed the limits of this world's cultivation, coupled with the fact that both of them were moving at the same time, the commotion caused by their actions was no laughing matter. The moment they started cultivating, something that resembled a black hole appeared beside them, gathering all the mystical spiritual chi in the Seven Star Lake towards them. In the blink of an eye, a small tornado was formed, its strength beyond imagination. As the two of them worked together, more than 90% of the spiritual chi formed by the silver net of silver threads gathered towards them from all directions, swallowing the spiritual chi like a whale swallowing the sea. The dozen or so people who had left earlier were not idling around either. They unleashed their entire lifetime's worth of cultivation base, trying their best to capture the dissipating spiritual chi in the air. Unfortunately, their gains were minuscule, not even a 10th or 20% of their usual gains. This result caused everyone in the group to feel extremely depressed. How did these two monsters appear? For so many years, it was not that no outsiders had discovered the secret of the Seven Star Lake, but those who had coveted the Seven Star Lake had all been killed by this group of people without exception. The reason why these people had not shown up to help Yutong defend against the enemy, regardless of morality or even family ties, was more because they were afraid of exposing their abilities and exposing this sacred cultivation ground. Once this place was exposed, there would definitely be more people coming here to take a share of the spoils. Chapter 872. The few of them were extremely perplexed. The natives around the Seven Star Lake had all been killed by us. Of course, there was no living thing left within a 1,000-mile radius. There was not a single trace of human life left. It was truly a desolate place. Why were there still people coming here? Their cultivation bases were so high, and there were 2 of them at the same time. This is really depressing. Putting aside everything else, just what kind of martial arts were they cultivating? How could they be so overbearing? We were already prepared to sacrifice half of the celestial and lunar spiritual energy, but it was still not enough. They snatched away more than 90% of the spiritual energy in one go. Aren't they afraid of being stuffed to death by absorbing such an enormous amount of spiritual qi at the very beginning? Unbeknownst to them, Yunyang and Ji Lingxi were muttering to themselves as they absorbed the enormous amount of spiritual energy. Why does the spiritual qi look so terrifying, but in reality, it's so little? Yunyang and Ji Lingxi spent the first night in a state of confusion and bewilderment. The endless frustration, anger, and curses of those people did not concern Yunyang and Ji Lingxi at all. It was not worth mentioning. The 11 people were collectively frustrated and angry, wishing that Yunyang and Ji Lingxi would explode and die from their gluttonous behavior. However, what they did not know was that after Yunyang and Ji Lingxi had absorbed more than 90% of the celestial and lunar spiritual energy, they still felt that although the intensity of the spiritual qi could be said to be mystical, it was still just so. That was all. These words sounded like they deserved a beating, but the ones who spoke were Yunyang and Ji Lingxi, who were filled with spiritual qi every day, whose cultivation base had improved tremendously after a nap, and who had countless Eastern amethysts in their hands. It was reasonable. After all, the mystical spiritual qi in front of them, compared to their own cultivation environment, was just a little odd. As for the so-called unparalleled opportunity, obviously, it did not count as one. The 10 or so people here were all poor people. They might think that a meal in a restaurant was wonderful, and it would be their dream life if they could eat in a restaurant every day. However, Yunyang and Ji Lingxi were people who ate Manchu Han Imperial Feast every day. Perhaps the dishes in this small restaurant were very delicious and outstanding, but to Yunyang and Ji Lingxi, it was just a unique flavor that was worth tasting. That was it. That was really it. In the wee hours of the morning, the mysterious net of light weaved by the light of the stars and the moon finally dispersed. The world returned to its original state, and the sounds of insects and cicadas rose and fell in the surroundings, sounding even clearer and louder. This doesn't match the name. Ji Lingxi opened her eyes and scratched her head. At the very least, it's more disappointing than I expected. How can it be considered an earth-shattering secret under such circumstances? Ji Lingxi asked, this is the so-called earth-shattering secret? Yunyang had a similar feeling as well. After a moment of thought, he said, I feel that something is wrong as well. But maybe it's just that our current level of cultivation is too high, far beyond the realm of ordinary cultivators. In fact, according to common sense, this realm is already an extremely rare and precious holy land for cultivation. At least for me, who has just received this news, it's a rare opportunity. After all, this realm has attracted all the Tao realm cultivators in front of me to stay here and live in seclusion. If I think deeper, if I had received this news if I were to think deeper, if I had arrived here earlier, I might have been killed by this group of people. Any one of these people is far stronger than Supreme Lord Springfrost and He Han Qing. Even if I were to transform into the wind and clouds, it would still be difficult. It's probably just that times have changed. Ji Lingxi nodded slowly and said, you're right. Then, what do we do now? Are we leaving immediately? Yunyang looked up at the sky and said, there's no hurry. Today is the 14th, and tomorrow is the night of the full moon. Let's wait and see. The 7 mountains around the 7-star lake are quite interesting. They look like the embryonic form of the 7 stars' heavenly spirit formation, especially after the moonlight and starlight are activated. Of course, if it really is the 7 stars' heavenly spirit formation, then it must activate the power of the stars in the sky. It can't be limited to just the stars and the moon. Yunyang smiled and said, "The 7 stars heavenly spirit formation is most effective when there's a full moon. If tomorrow is still the same as today, then we won't stay here any longer. We'll go straight to the bound of universe from here." Ji Lingxi hummed in agreement and said, "Let's do it then. I really can't suppress my power these few days. I keep feeling that my mystical qi is showing signs of going out of control." She raised her head and asked doubtfully, "Yunyang, how do you know so much?" Yunyang smiled. "It's not that I know a lot, but the 7 stars heavenly spirit formation is a legendary formation. I'm not sure, and I don't even know the specific method of setting up the formation at all. It's just that the geographical location of the 7 mountains is different, and the spiritual energy of the stars and moon has descended upon the world." Recalling that the 7 stars heavenly spirit formation has always been said to snatch spiritual energy from the heavens, that's why I made a guess. As for why I have to wait for the night of the full moon, it's because I've been monitoring those people's divine senses, heartbeats, and pulses for such a long time. After tonight, it can be said that they hate us to the extreme. But at dawn, there's clearly a relaxed and joyful emotion in their divine senses, as if they're looking forward to something. Their hearts were beating exceptionally fast as well. The 11 of them actually only cared about checking on our side during the heaven and earth anomaly. This clearly goes against common sense, especially for people like them. Actually, I purposely showed disappointment in my deific consciousness just now, and it was also at this time that their joy and relaxation appeared. Yunyang smiled. "Lingxi, what do you think they're looking forward to?" Ji Lingxi's eyes darted around as she asked, "What are they looking forward to? Are you saying that they're looking forward to the night of the full moon?" Yunyang smiled. "They probably aren't looking forward to the night of the full moon, but for us to leave as soon as possible. After all, my reaction is that I feel that the miracle here isn't all that impressive. Naturally, they're hoping that we'll leave as soon as we can. Originally, what they should be most afraid of is our strength that can easily take their lives. However, because I have already let them off yesterday, I have basically guaranteed that their lives will no longer be in danger. On this basis, what else can make them feel relaxed and happy? Isn't it the fact that they can still enjoy the secrets of this place after we leave? On the other hand, their joy is even more of an indication that something is amiss. With both of us here to suppress them, we can kill them at any time. Under such circumstances, they can still feel happy." Yunyang paused and said, "So we don't have to leave in a hurry. It's because of these factors that I've suggested to wait for the night of the full moon to make a decision." Yunyang's gaze focused on Ji Lingxi's face as he said softly, "Do you understand now?" Ji Lingxi was hit with a sudden realization. "I see. I don't think as far ahead as you do. Sigh, I really don't know how the brains of people like you grow. How can there be so many twists and turns? A casual sentence can set a huge trap for someone. It's terrifying to be able to glean so much information from such a small detail." Yunyang laughed. "What's most frightening is to take things too seriously. Actually, as long as you think about these things properly and think about the reasons based on their reactions, you'll be able to get a rough idea. It's never a bad thing to think 1 or 2 steps ahead. Especially when I'm not by your side in the future. No matter what happens, you have to think about it this way. Think before you do anything." Ji Lingxi nodded and hummed in agreement. The night of the full moon arrived in the blink of an eye. The setting sun had just set behind the mountain while the west was still giving off a peaceful afterglow. The moon had only just risen above the horizon in the east. In that split second, dozens of miles around the 7-star lake was suddenly enveloped in an unusually bright atmosphere. The sun that had already set in the west suddenly emitted thousands of rays of golden light. The sun had already set, but thousands of golden rays overflowed from the back of the mountain, shooting straight into the sky. On the other side, the moon that had just risen slowly also emitted thousands of rays of silver light, shooting into the sky as well. At this moment, in this split second, the light of the sun and the light of the moon intersected in midair at the same time. One was glorious while the other was cold, yet it was a perfect fusion. Chapter 873. Yun-yang sucked in a breath of air. So that's how it is. We only need to wait for the starlight to shine, and the truth will be revealed. Sunlight and moonlight intertwined in the air, swirling slowly like a giant egg yolk. It was half yellow and half white, exuding a hazy, mystical glow. It was a sight to behold. The setting sun seemed to have lost its remaining luster and energy after emitting thousands of rays of golden light. The sky darkened as usual, without any signs of going against the natural order. It was probably only here, in the sky above the seven-star lake, that there was an additional mass of yellow and white. At this moment, the sky above the seven-star lake was hazy. After the brilliance of sunlight and moonlight, starlight began to appear as well. This time, starlight descended as soon as it appeared. The starlight that filled the sky flowed through the entire starry sky and descended, merging with the brilliance of the sun and moon in the sky. The moment the three lights of the sun, moon, and starlight converged, the radiance grew brighter. A streak of silver light suddenly appeared at the end of the stream and shot straight down into the seven-star lake. Immediately after, the entire lake seemed to have transformed into a vast starry sky. As far as the eye could see, specks of starlight could be seen. A cloud of dense spiritual energy gradually rose from the surface of the lake. The spiritual chi was different from what he had seen the day before. It was now flowing with a bright silver luster, pleasing to the eye and relaxing the mind. Yun-yang exhaled softly, feeling waves of comfort coursing through his entire body. Even he, who was used to seeing treasures of heaven and earth and breathing in the eastern purple chi, felt an indescribable sense of joy. This must be the true secret of the seven-star lake. Yun-yang said, "Make the best use of your time to cultivate." "I'm going down to take a look." Ji Lingxi asked blankly, "You want to go down to take a look while I'm cultivating? Why do you want to go down to take a look? Isn't it better to cultivate with me?" What Ji Lingxi and Yun-yang felt was no different. Both of them could feel the surging spiritual chi and the high degree of assimilation after the spiritual chi entered their meridians. It was a comforting feeling, as if the energy had instantly turned into their own strength without the need for a lotus flower. This kind of cultivation method was simply too satisfying, it couldn't be any better. Ji Lingxi could not understand why Yun-yang had chosen to leave at this moment. This was simply neglecting the essentials. "Little fool," Yun-yang said, "you're focusing on the wrong point. Although this strange spiritual chi is a great benefit to us now, its source is the confluence of the sun, moon, and star rays just now. The origin of the confluence of the three rays shot directly into the seven-star lake, and only then did this spiritual chi rise from the seven-star lake. So the question was, why didn't this new spiritual chi directly descend from the sky like yesterday? Instead, we'll have to go through some trouble. Furthermore, today's spirit chi is extraordinary. It's even stronger than the eastern purple chi. This makes it even more precious. From this to that, could it be understood that there is a peerless treasure hidden in the seven-star lake? The combination of the sun, moon, and star light is precisely because they shine on this treasure that it gives birth to this mysterious spiritual energy? Yun-yang said, "If this is the case, does it not mean that we have to get our hands on this treasure to truly reap the benefits once and for all? Are you willing to leave this opportunity to those bastards?" A cold glint flashed across his eyes. Instead of cutting off their path of retreat forever? Ji Lingxi said worriedly, "This situation has probably been going on for many years. Compared to us, those local tyrants must have discovered it long ago. Why haven't they taken this treasure out yet? Does it mean that there's some kind of danger?" Yun-yang said indifferently, "At least they're not dead, are they?" Ji Lingxi's words enlightened him, and he immediately understood. Yes, these people were not dead. This was Yun Yang's biggest source of confidence and assurance. Just because they could not get it did not mean that he could not. After all, Yun Yang's cultivation base was already unrivaled in this world, much higher than these people. The difference was like heaven and earth. If even they were not in danger, how could Yun Yang's probing be in any danger? On the contrary, since he had confirmed that there was no danger, Yun Yang would naturally give it a try. All right. Ji Lingxi said, if there's any danger, remember to call for me. I'm not being pretentious, just in case. Yun Yang nodded and immediately turned into the wind. The sound of the wind quietly melted into the night sky, arriving at the spot where the three beams of light converged in an instant. Following the light that shone downwards, he dove straight down. Other than Ji Lingxi, no one else had the chance to notice such a maneuver. It was truly undetectable. Underwater. Yun Yang dove all the way down, but he did not transform into his water manifestation immediately. It was probably because the water of the seven-star lake was not very deep, only a few hundred feet deep at most. It did not take him long to reach the bottom of the lake, where there was a thick layer of mud. The beam of light from the convergence of the three beams shone down along the direction of the mud. Yun Yang's mind raced, and with a single thought, he turned into a water droplet and seeped down along the mud. It was only about 30 to 40 feet before he came into contact with rocks. Even though Yun Yang had turned into a water droplet, he could not penetrate it. However, the beam of light had obviously stopped there and did not change its direction at all. It was obvious that its target was right below the layer of rocks. Yun Yang knew that it would be difficult to rely solely on his water manifestation, so he switched to his earth manifestation cultivation method. The cultivation method that originally belonged to Supreme Earth was abruptly activated by Yun Yang, and he instantly became one with the rocks beneath him. He then went to the edge and dove down along the cracks at the edge. The so-called earth and rock manifestations could only be individual pieces, or else the entire continent would only be a single piece of rock. Since they were not a single entity, there would definitely be gaps between them. As for Yun Yang's various cultivation methods and forms, they had all provided him with endless possibilities to dive deeper. After diving another 500 feet, there were no longer any giant rocks in the area he was at. What was left were only fine gravel and sand, as well as layers upon layers of underground water. So it's not that those people don't want to come down and look for me, but they are powerless. Even my water manifestation can't find anything, let alone them. Yun Yang thought to himself. This place is already 2,000 feet away from the bottom of the seven-star lake. What kind of expert would be able to reach here? Just the large stone layer alone is already a huge obstacle that would be difficult to cross. If he really wanted to go there, he would first have to drain all the water in the seven-star lake, then dig out the mud that was a few feet deep, then lift up the layers of rocks that were hundreds of feet thick, and pass through several layers of underground water that was blocked by hard soil. Finally, he would have to continue going down. There were still layers upon layers of large rocks in front of him. Moreover, even if he really managed to overcome all these obstacles, he still might not be able to find the key. Moreover, because of the destruction of the landscape, he might lose the opportunity to obtain the triple light spiritual chi forever. It was indeed a difficult plan to obtain the treasure. In this world, I'm afraid that no one else can come here except for me. At least, with the prerequisite of not destroying the landscape, there is definitely no one else. Yun Yang smiled in his heart, feeling quite proud of himself. However, he stopped smiling after that, mainly because he could not smile anymore. This was because he continued to descend for thousands of feet, but he still found nothing. If it were not for the fact that the energy of the triple light was still present, Yun Yang would have thought that he was looking in the wrong direction. If this goes on, will I directly drill through this continent? Yun-yang muttered in his heart as he continued to descend. Finally, the new layer of obstacle that he came into contact with was even harder than he had imagined. It was simply terrifying, moreover, it was cold to the touch, and vaguely familiar. This is stellar steel? Yun-yang could not help but be shocked, and he discerned the truth of the obstacle. The lowest layer of obstacle that he had encountered so far was actually made of the incomparably hard stellar steel, and it seemed to be a complete piece of it. Upon closer inspection, he saw that the stellar steel was emitting waves of dense purple spiritual qi. There was no doubt that the treasure that shone and emitted spiritual qi from the triple light was within this stellar steel. His hard work did not disappoint him, and he finally found the place. Yun-yang was overjoyed, quickly searching for a gap in all four directions. After much effort, he came to an extremely depressing conclusion: there was nothing. The entire piece of star iron was like a gigantic iron ball. It had a circumference of several hundred zhang, and it didn't leave a single trace of its shape behind. There was no gap at all. It was a complete sphere. Yun-yang could not help feeling dispirited after confirming this point. He was still feeling smug just now, thinking that as long as there was a gap, he would be able to go down and obtain the treasure. Now, he was immediately given a resounding slap. Yun-yang was not willing to give up, so he tried to transform into his metal form and merge with the stellar steel. As long as he could merge, he could naturally sneak into the stellar steel and leave with the treasure within. Yun-yang's wish was beautiful, but the outcome was far from ideal. Yun-yang's metal form could not merge with the stellar steel. After a long while, Yun-yang used all his manifestation powers, but no matter what method he used, he could not do anything to the stellar steel. Do I have to use brute force? Use the divine edge's sharpness to fight against the stellar steel? Yun-yang looked at his surroundings gloomily. It seemed like there was too little space left for him to perform. He was now a tiny water droplet, there was not much space for him to wield his saber. Yun-yang made up his mind. Emmy. Ayaya, come out and take a look at this stellar steel, see if there's any way to break it. Emmy's deific consciousness probed and expressed its helplessness after a while. Ayaya. Ayaya, can't break it? Yun-yang grew increasingly frustrated. Emmy was the last resort that he could think of, but even Emmy could not do it. Ayaya, Emmy expressed its frustration, brandishing its claws as it tried to explain. This thing is indestructible, so I can only cut it slowly? Yun-yang's frustration escalated once again. Did Emmy mean that even if he chose to break it with brute force, he could only cut it slowly with the sharpness of the divine edge? Just how thick was this star iron? How long would it take to cut it bit by bit? He really did not have much time left. Ayaya, are you saying that this isn't ordinary stellar steel? It's the essence of stellar steel, the heart of stellar? Yun-yang was rather frustrated. Can't I just keep it in my deific consciousness space? This was Yun-yang's wild imagination. Keeping it and cutting it slowly in his deific consciousness space would be the most convenient way. The problem was that the possibility of doing so was slim, at least, that was what Yun-yang thought. After all, Yun-yang had tried it just now. Although this piece of stellar steel was only a few hundred feet in diameter, its density and weight were beyond imagination. At least, Yun-yang himself could hardly move it. Unexpectedly, Emmy called out hesitantly after a moment of contemplation, Ayaya. Ayaya. Ayaya? I can try. Keep it in my deific consciousness space. Yun-yang was stunned before he was overjoyed. Let's try. For the first time, Yun-yang mobilized all of his deific consciousness energy in a way that pushed him to his limits. Emmy exerted all of its energy and channeled it into Yun-yang as well. Then, both Emmy and Yun-yang felt dumbfounded. There was a loud boom. The piece of stellar steel actually swayed a little. However, it only swayed a little, it did not actually lift it. As for Yun Yang's deific consciousness energy, it had been completely drained just now. He floated in the water in a daze, unable to regain his senses even after a long while. Emmy was in a daze as well, its originally dark green leaves seemed to pale in comparison. At the same time, the radiance of the three combined lights disappeared. Yun Yang guessed that it should be daybreak now, which was the next day's dawn. Yun Yang calmed himself down and recovered a little. How terrifying. The pain that almost tore his brain apart still lingered in Yun Yang's mind. This thing could not be opened or moved. What should he do? Could he really return empty-handed after entering a treasure trove? Yun Yang pondered for a long time before an idea struck him. That's not right. I'm afraid the amount of energy needed to move this iron ball is far more than the weight of this iron ball. Right now, it's almost like it's connected to the entire mountain range and stuck underground. If I cut open the surrounding areas and separate the stuck parts, then it'll truly be an iron ball with only star iron. I believe it'll be much easier that way. Compared to being stuck up, down, left and right, it's no different from moving these mountains into the deific consciousness space at the same time. It's reasonable that I can't move it. Yun Yang made up his mind and focused on recuperating. After a while, the divine edge emerged quietly and sliced its surroundings inch by inch. Big chapter, first chapter today. The pace has been a little slow these few days. It's true that I've scrapped the outline of the bound of universe. I feel that the entry point isn't right, it's too much related to Tianxian. After writing about the secular world for so long, I don't really feel like writing anymore. So, after thinking about it for 2 days, I want to redesign the outline of the bound of universe. However, I still don't have a clue about the problem. Therefore, the pace of these few chapters has been slowed down. However, I've thought it through today. I might as well finish writing the secular world and take a few days off to think about it. Chapter 874. Ji Lingxi waited quietly above the lake, but Yun Yang did not come out even when the sky started to brighten. A whole night had passed, and he still had not come out. The surface of the lake had been calm during this period of time, without the slightest ripple. It was eerily quiet. There was a living person down there. Where had Yun Yang gone? Ji Lingxi could not help but panic when Yun Yang did not appear even when the sun rose. Could it be that he encountered danger and was eaten by something hidden here, such as a big fish? Thinking of this, Ji Lingxi jumped into the water without another word. It was a pity that she did not find any trace of Yun Yang after swimming a few rounds at the bottom of the 7-star lake. She could not help but panic. He had clearly gone down, so how could he not be found? She came up to take a breath of fresh air, then went down to continue her search. Ji Lingxi stayed in the lake for a whole day, searching for Yun Yang, but there was still no sign of him. Finally, the dozen or so people who lived in seclusion came over to ask about him. "Miss, has Lord Supreme Cloud gone down to explore?" "TSK, TSK, TSK, we've gone down to the bottom of this lake many times. Although we didn't find anything, it wasn't dangerous either. Why is there no one else? This is strange. Alas, could it be that Lord Supreme Cloud has been cursed by heaven? This is really hard to say. What do you think we should do?" "Alas, this is hard to say." Ji Lingxi was flustered. She was already in a state of panic. When these people saw that Yun Yang had gone down and did not come back up, they began to gloat over his misfortune. The few of them decided not to leave. They stood by the lake and watched as Ji Lingxi went down to search, again and again. Every time she came up, she would offer a few fake comforting words. They would not be able to find fault with her on the surface. At least, they did not give Ji Lingxi any room to vent her anger on them. However, the gloating expression on his face was clear as day. As time went by, Ji Lingxi's anger rose from the bottom of her heart. Suddenly, she exploded. Do you think you're safe just because you're on the surface? Do I need a reason to kill all of you? Do I need one? Do I not? It was indeed unnecessary. Even if Supreme Cloud dies, it's not your turn to gloat over his misfortune. Die, all of you. Ah. Ji Lingxi had flown into a rage and was about to kill. With a single move, he killed 4 of them. Then, without stopping, he went after the remaining 7 with his death. She was depressed, full of grief and indignation, and had nowhere to vent it. Coincidentally, these people were beside her, fanning the flames and taking pleasure in her misfortune. How could she care about her demeanor? Who gave you the courage to mock Supreme Cloud in front of me? Do I really look like I have such a good temper? Ji Lingxi's eyebrows shot up as she went on a killing spree. It only took a moment for the 11 men to be wiped out. Speaking of which, these 11 people were courting death. It was probably because they were too engrossed in the cultivation atmosphere of this place that their temperament was far from matching their cultivation. They did not have the brave heart of a martial artist, and they did not have the sophisticated will of a wise man. They were like flies trying to gain personal gains, rashly provoking a peerless expert. How could they not die? How could they not die? Since the appearance of the man who said he would watch his family die, Ji Lingxi's murderous intent had already surged. She wanted to kill these people right away. However, Yun Yang did not say anything else. Only then did Ji Lingxi suppress her murderous intent. She did not expect these fellows to be so blinded by greed that they would jump out to gloat after escaping death. It was like a cat licking the tiger's nose. They were the most suitable candidates for seeking death. With the last bang, the last man died under Ji Lingxi's palm. A small, fair palm slapped out forcefully, sending the man flying into the air. He spun more than 100 rounds. His neck and head had to spin a dozen more times before his head was sent flying with a slap. His body fell into the 7-star lake, while his head whizzed all the way to the other side of the mountain. Ji Lingxi's murderous intent was still surging all over her body. Her eyes were bloodshot, a clear sign that her anger had yet to be extinguished. She was carefully calculating if there were any survivors. Fortunately, there was a splash on the surface of the water. Ji Lingxi quickly turned her head to look in the direction of the sound. She saw Yun Yang floating on the surface of the water tiredly, swimming towards the shore with great difficulty. It was as if he had just gone through a great battle. He was exhausted and could barely move. Ji Lingxi could not help but let out a cry of surprise or joy when she saw this. She dashed over and lifted Yun Yang up from the water, only to realize that Yun Yang was truly devoid of energy. His face was sallow and his condition was unprecedentedly dispirited, as if his body had been hollowed out. You. What happened? Shut up. Get me up quickly. Yun Yang was devoid of energy, but his tone was as arrogant as ever. Without another word, Ji Lingxi grabbed Yun Yang and dashed ashore, like she was carrying a large salted fish. Her mood had not only turned from sorrow to joy, but she was also elated and overjoyed. After all, as long as he was still alive, everything was negotiable. Even if his body had been hollowed out, he could recover with some nourishment. When did you come up? When you went on a killing spree. I had just killed 4, then why didn't you say anything? If you had, I wouldn't have killed them. I was afraid that you would be happy to see me safe and sound and not kill them. Ji Lingxi blushed. Humph, who cares about your thick skin? A moment later. What happened to you? Why are you so tired? Can't you recover after such a long time? It's a long story. Yun Yang sighed and began to describe his experience in detail. After all, he had emptied his entire cultivation base twice in such a short period of time. Anyone would have been dispirited and drained of energy. You've kept it? Ji Lingxi's eyes shone. Let me see. Cough, you can see it yourself when I put you into the space later. I really can't take it out now. Yun Yang's lips quivered. It had taken a lot of effort to collect this piece of stellar steel this time. He had almost died in the water because of this piece of stellar steel. Now that he thought about it, the lingering fear still lingered in his heart, making him shudder. I don't want to go in and see. Ji Lingxi snorted, her face flushed. Why? Yun Yang was curious. Forget Emmy, just the fact that the few whiteys were jumping around in the space had already proven that his deific consciousness space would have no problem storing a person. Chapter 875. Ji Lingxi blushed and said angrily, none of your business. What do you know? She stomped away. Yun Yang was speechless. He did not know that Ji Lingxi was actually thinking, wouldn't he be able to do whatever he wants once he enters his deific consciousness space? See whatever he wants. In the deific consciousness space, he's omnipotent. Even if it's my body, my face, my... What's more, what's the difference between entering his deific consciousness space and letting Yun Yang enter her body? How could that be? Humph. I'm not going in. I'm not going in this lifetime. What's more important than a girl's modesty? The more she thought about it, the more she felt that Yun Yang was abominable. He had violated a girl's dignity. She could not help but turn around and scold him, pervert. Lecher. Pervert. Yun Yang, you're too filthy. Yun Yang was speechless. What did I do? What did I say? How am I a pervert, a filthy person? Why didn't I know? Where did this come from? Yun Yang's deific consciousness had suffered serious damage this time. He had to recuperate for 3 days before he managed to recover half of it. During these few days, even without the star iron as a guide, the formation of the 7-star lake continued to operate as usual. Every night, the power of starlight would still descend from the sky, and the atmosphere was exactly the same as before. However, Yun Yang had long understood that the night of the full moon would no longer be the same as before. But no matter what, this place is still a paradise that can aid in cultivation. Yun Yang sighed, lost in thought. He then used the 9 heavens dictum to let Shui Wuyin send a message to the 4 noble young masters, Fang Mafei, Bai Xue, Lao Mei, and even Yun Xiaoyao. This realm was the most suitable place for them to improve. Yun Yang was only relieved when he had informed all the people he was familiar with. After resting for a few more days, he finally felt refreshed and rejuvenated. Shall we go? All right. During these few days of recuperation, both of their mystical cultivation skills had been elevated to their current peak, or perhaps the limit of what this world could bear. If they were to forcefully break through, they would be hated by this world first. On the other hand, they only needed a thought to activate their bodies, and they would be able to immediately trigger a celestial phenomenon. No matter how you looked at it, with the cultivation these two people currently possessed, they were no longer suitable to stay in this profound sky continent. In other words, the two people's cultivation had long surpassed it, but they had been deliberately suppressing it. Now, it had reached the point where it was difficult to suppress it. Once we reach the bound of universe, it doesn't matter if we're still together and not separated. But if we were to separate, Yun Yang reminded her, remember what I said. Be careful and think before you act. I'll remember that. I'll definitely be careful. Ji Lingxi seemed to sense something as well. She lowered her head subconsciously and did not speak for a long, long time. He seemed to be thinking about something. For a moment, he was lost in thought and stood rooted to the ground. Yun Yang did not understand what the girl was thinking about at this time. It was very strange. Kiss me. Ji Lingxi recalled how Yunyang had kissed Shengguan Lingxiu before she left. She could not help murmuring softly, yearning and anticipating what Yunyang had said. What? Her words were exceptionally muffled, her voice low and abrupt. Yunyang could not hear her clearly at first, so he asked instinctively. Ji Lingxi was enraged at once and said, "I said, you're a pig." Was a girl's dignity something that could be violated? Yunyang rolled his eyes at once. Oh, women are so hard to please. I don't even understand, what's going on? You women are always like this, it makes me feel helpless. Ji Lingxi's eyes darted around before she suddenly roared, "I said, I asked you to kiss me. Are you deaf?" She sprung up abruptly. Hugging Yunyang, she pressed her red lips against his. Their parting was imminent, she could no longer care about a girl's shyness. Dignity and reputation were nothing in front of the person she loved. She did not care anymore. Yunyang finally understood. Looking at the alluring lips before him, his heart throbbed as well. Without thinking, he kissed her. He thought to himself, being ordered to kiss, doesn't seem to be too much. I seem to have forgotten something. Just as their lips touched, a beam of red light moved abruptly. Boom! Yunyang, who was known as the world's top supreme cloud and supreme wit, was flung hundreds of feet away. He hissed through gritted teeth in midair, "I knew I'd forgotten something." Fortunately, Ji Lingxi was the one who took the initiative this time, so Yunyang's injury was not serious. However, he had rested for half a day. Ji Lingxi's expression was dark as she mumbled to herself. Who was she cursing? Yunyang was very curious about the stellar steel ball that had been kept into his deific consciousness. The stellar steel that had reached the level of stellar core was already an extremely rare and precious item. What could be hidden within it? Keeping the stellar steel ball into his deific consciousness, Yunyang was initially rather pleased with himself. He thought that the item that had entered his space was like a piece of meat on a chopping board that he could do whatever he wanted with it. In reality, however, Yunyang grew more and more discouraged. Yunyang had spent half a day, racking his brains and using all his mystical treasures, but he still could not break the outer layer of the stellar steel ball. Compared to before, the divine edge could be unleashed to its fullest and could cut 5 feet deep with a single slash. The effect was obvious. However, the moment he pulled the saber out, the 5-foot deep gap had healed instantly. It was completely healed. The result almost made Yunyang's eyeballs fall out of their sockets. Was this still the stellar steel? Steel? Since when did steel have the ability to heal itself? And so quickly? Even if it was the stellar steel that had settled to the highest level, the stellar steel core should not have such a metamorphosis. Yunyang then cultivated his manifestation powers, the endless divine art. He tried again and again, but there was still no improvement. Finally, Yunyang focused his manifestation powers on the divine edge, but there was still no progress. Even when Yunyang cultivated the endless divine art and performed the saber truth destiny with all his might, it was to no avail as the steel ball recovered instantly, despite causing more damage to it. Even the combination of the divine edge, the saber truth destiny, could not do anything to this steel ball. Yunyang was at his wit's end, helpless. After Yunyang's many fruitless attempts, Emmy tried wrapping the steel ball with its green vines and studied it for a long time, but it still looked extremely dejected. There must be something good inside, but why can't I break it? Emmy finally came to a conclusion. The effect of the combination of the saber truth destiny and the divine edge was, in fact, exceptionally obvious and effective. It was just that Yunyang's cultivation base was still too shallow. If he could advance to the 6th stage of the endless divine art and evolve the divine edge at the same time, he might be able to break this steel ball. Yunyang was rather dismayed. He was only at the 4th stage now, it was getting harder and harder to advance to the next level. When would the 6th stage be important? Chapter 876. Furthermore, what the hell did the probably mean? Did it not mean that it was still possible that it could not be broken at that stage? Forget it, it was better to have hope than none. Taking 10,000 steps back, this thing had already landed in his divine sense space, and no one could take it away. Although it was difficult to improve the mystical skill, there would be a day of success. The future was long, the future was long. Thinking about it, Yunyang finally let go of his throbbing heart. He was no longer anxious. 3 days later. Both of them stood at the peak of the mountain. Are you ready? Yes. What about you? I'm ready as well. Once he spoke, both of them fell silent. Are you really not going back to take a look? I'm not going back. It's better not to see each other. This world is almost the result of your blood, sweat, and tears. I thought that you'd only leave after it's truly unified. My goal has never been to unite the world, then what is it? My goal is to bring my brothers back to life. This has been my wish ever since the disaster that day. It has never wavered. There are many more unsolved mysteries in this period of time. I hope that we can solve them all when we reach the bound of universe and have a smooth journey ahead. Let's go. All right. For a moment, both of them channeled their mystical skills at the same time. Two massive auras that had been suppressed for a long time surged into the sky. Waves of milky white brilliance suddenly overflowed from their bodies like stars. A radius of hundreds of feet was filled with dreamy colors that were infinitely beautiful. Two powerful auras shot straight up into the sky, forcefully charging into the clouds, displaying their might that reigned supreme over this world. It was obvious that they were summoning something at this very moment. In the sky, the sparse white clouds slowly disappeared, and the sky was clear for thousands of miles. However, the cloudless sky only lasted for an extremely short period of time. A moment later, the unexpected dark clouds rushed over like tens of thousands of galloping horses. The endless sky also gradually sounded with the muffled sound of thunder from far to near. At this moment, the vast might of the heavens enveloped the entire profound sky continent. There was no place it could not reach and no place it could not hear. At this moment, everyone on the continent lifted their heads to look at the sky in shock. This apocalyptic scene that seemed like the end of the world could be said to be rare in both ancient and modern times. The sky full of dark clouds, starting from the edge of the sky, all the way to the top of his head, it really only took a moment. One had to know that the distance between them was tens of thousands of miles. It was definitely not a short distance. The speed of the dark clouds was incredibly fast. Even when Yunyang's cloud manifestation was moving at its highest speed, it was not as fast. The endless dark clouds in all directions were like the most disciplined soldiers who had heard the highest order of summons. In the blink of an eye, all of them gathered in the sky. From the initial clear sky to the dark clouds that covered the sky, one couldn't even see one's fingers in front of one's face. From start to finish, only a few dozen breaths of time had passed. Over the course of the year, there had been several such incidents. However, the previous few incidents were not as grand and unprecedented as this one. On the peak of 7-Star Mountain, the wind howled and howled. Countless towering trees that had been planted deep in the mountains for many years were uprooted, swaying and flying to who knew where. Yunyang and Ji Lingxi stood on the peak of the mountain, unmoving. Their eyes were shining with curiosity. The bound of universe. We are coming. All along, the bound of universe had been a mysterious place to cultivators born in the Tianxian continent. There were very few legends about the bound of universe that had been circulated in the mortal world. Now, this mysterious world was about to be fully opened up before the two of them, allowing them to experience it firsthand. The dark clouds in the sky grew thicker and thicker. Thunder and lightning began to wreak havoc high up in the sky. The atmosphere was eerie. The densely packed bolts of lightning interweaved to form a web of lightning in midair. The intense light blinded one's eyes, making it difficult to look straight at it. The continuous rumbling of thunder seemed to have become a rhythmic ancient war drum, ringing incessantly, layer by layer. From far to near, it was deafening. After a while, a torrential downpour poured down like the Milky Way had been breached. Suddenly, two gigantic eyes appeared in midair. One was looking at Yunyang while the other was looking at Ji Lingxi. Although both of their cultivation base was profound and had long been at the pinnacle of this world, they had experienced the so-called ascension and transcendence after all. However, they were still unfazed, quietly waiting for the subsequent changes. It's said that when demons become immortals, they have to be struck by lightning. Only by going through the baptism of lightning can they transform and improve. Ji Lingxi's gaze was tinged with fear. Will we be struck by lightning as well? Yunyang said uncertainly, it can't be, right? Before his words echoed in the air, two bolts of lightning had already struck down, aiming straight for the top of both of their heads. Ji Lingxi shrieked when she saw the situation. Her so-called composure were nowhere to be found. With a loud boom, both of their hair had turned into a messy mess at the first moment of the baptism of lightning. However, this was only the beginning. Bolts of lightning struck relentlessly, growing thicker and thicker with different hues. In the beginning, the lightning was bright white, similar to the thunderbolts that usually occurred on rainy days. Later on, it slowly turned red, purple, and various other colors, each possessing its own power. Both of them had no experience with such a baptism of lightning, nor had they seen anything similar. They had not even heard of any related legends. Therefore, at this juncture, they had no concept of avoiding or defending themselves. They were even afraid that it would be bad if they managed to avoid the lightning. Therefore, the two novices stood there dumbly, allowing themselves to be baptized by the lightning without moving an inch. They could only circulate their cultivation base to protect themselves. Ji Lingxi was truly unscathed. She had the protection of the red light and was impervious to all tribulations. The impact of the lightning on her was at most like a tickle to her. It could not even be considered a tickle. The tickling sensation came from the weaker ones that could not penetrate her self-defense force, so the sensation was naturally minimal. As for the stronger ones, they were eliminated by the red light directly, so of course, she would not feel anything. Yunyang, on the other hand, was in a miserable state. Passively enduring the lightning strikes, relying only on his self-defense force to defend himself, it was like trying to put out a burning cart of firewood with a cup of water. After holding on for a moment, his physical body began to falter. Then, he was struck from head to toe until his flesh was lacerated and charred. He did not look like a living person. Chapter 877. He went through the outline a few times. He overthrew it and overthrew it again and again. He was extremely vexed. Finally, he thought of a creative idea, but he hesitated, because this creative idea was enough to support a new book. He hesitated on whether to write it. Ahem. Finally, he made up his mind. The future could be left in the future. He should write it first. He had taken leave for the past few days and attended the Writers' Association's meeting. He came to Inner Mongolia. To write the outline, he often skipped classes and meetings. He had already left a deep impression on the leader. He was not having a good time and was always absent-minded. Who knew what he was thinking about? Without further ado, it's finally done. I'll fly home the day after tomorrow. Dansu, tomorrow night, which is the 30th, we can resume updating. Are you surprised? Are you surprised? Have I always been very hardworking? Do you want to give me a wave of votes to encourage me? Finally, I'll say something very serious. I haven't updated for a few days. I really miss all of you. I feel like there's something missing in my life. Thankfully, I'll be back tomorrow. This time, I feel like my eyes have lit up, hee hee. Chapter 878. Yun-yang could only feel himself floating, his body completely weightless. His deific consciousness was blurry and he did not know where he was. However, there was a solemn and dignified voice that kept echoing in the surroundings. The heaven and earth are black and yellow, the universe is barren, the lower realms commoners come knocking on my door, the way is the way, there is no hesitation, the country has its laws, the heaven has its rules, the way has its path, the way has its rules, the heaven and earth are heartless, the people are limitless, keep your heart and mind, it's inauspicious to go against it, in the martial world, the strong is king, do not indulge in lust or lust, those who go against it shall be hurt. In the martial world, heaven will pay, good will be rewarded, evil will be punished, the ruler is above, do not think and do not measure. The words were repeated over and over again in his mind for a good 70 to 80 times. In the end, when Yun-yang felt that he could recite it backwards, another solemn voice came unexpectedly, entering the bound of universe, the ruler is free to soar, the heavens' rules are in your heart, you shall not go against it. Disobey, you shall die. Don't blame me for not warning you. Then, Yun-yang felt himself being lifted off the ground, falling rapidly like he was carrying 1,000 caddies. He did not know how high up he was in the sky. Falling so quickly, it would be fine if he was injured, but he would not fall to his death just like that, would he? Yun-yang tried his best to gather spiritual qi to lighten his body and decelerate to reduce the speed of his fall, but it was all in vain. The spiritual qi in his body, which had always been at his command, was now completely sealed, unable to be mobilized at all. Even Emmy had lost contact with him just like before, as if it did not exist at all. If he had only fallen at a high speed, Yun-yang would still have room to maneuver despite his precarious situation. However, the thunder and lightning that kept rumbling around him became the last straw that broke the camel's back. Bolt after bolt of lightning struck him with perfect accuracy. His entire body was enveloped in an excruciating pain, as if he was being torn apart. Under the continuous and escalating assault of the pain, Yun-yang could not help but faint. Boom! Yun-yang's body landed in a dense forest like a meteorite. The entire ground shook 3 times as a certain someone fell to the ground. Dust billowed into the sky, covering the entire area. Yun-yang's body sank deep into the soil like he was burying himself, unable to see the light of day. After an unknown amount of time, Yun-yang slowly woke up. It was one thing for him to regain his consciousness, but the fact that he could not see his own fingers and that his nose and mouth were suffocating were reminding him that he was currently buried in the ground. Yun-yang dared not delay as he tried his best to circulate the spiritual qi in his body. If he wanted to break out of the ground, he had to at least use the earth manifestation power. It would be a great irony if the 9 supremes and 9 elemental powers were to perish in the ground due to suffocation. Just as Yun-yang took a breath, the spiritual qi in his dantian responded like a tsunami. A massive, unstoppable force carried Yun-yang out of the ground with a loud boom. Yun-yang was completely unprepared for the sudden turn of events. He was still stuck in the fear of not being able to circulate his spiritual qi, falling freely from a high altitude and being buried deep underground. His best plan was to be able to circulate a portion of his essential qi or turn into the earth manifestation to support himself out of the predicament of being buried deep underground. If he could not even do this, it was not impossible to contact Emmy and ask it to provide him with a portion of his life force to avoid the situation of dying knowing about it. Unexpectedly, the circulation speed of his spiritual qi was more than twice as fast as when he was in Tianxian continent. Although it was only a thought and a breath of qi, he was able to escape the shackles of the ground and see the light of day once again. Although Yun-yang was free, the doubts in his heart grew. He could not even circulate a single strand of spiritual qi when he fell just now. How could he suddenly improve by leaps and bounds when he woke up? What was going on? Yun Yang, who was in midair, lost his balance, which was a rare occurrence. He shot out horizontally and then shot up into the sky like a cannonball. His movement defied logic, stirring up a cloud of dust. Poof! Yun Yang's qi dissipated and he returned to the ground. However, he realized that the ground he was standing on seemed to be a little soft. Looking down, he could not help but be shocked. The ground was filled with piles of fallen leaves that were several feet deep. Furthermore, they were all leaves that had just fallen and had yet to rot completely. Yun Yang's doubts grew. What kind of tree could shed so many leaves in one season? This should not be the case. If it had been more than a year, they would have rotted long ago. How could they be so fresh and wilted? When he lifted his head and looked around, he was shocked once more. Where am I? This was a dense forest, the kind that was deep in the mountains where no one would ever tread. A place like this should be an area where plants and flowers grew the most luxuriant. However, when he looked out, all he could see was a scene of wilted yellow. It could be said that the entire place was dead silent and withered. It was true. As far as his eyes could see, be it the plants or the towering trees, they were all wilted. There was no sign of life, not even a hint of greenery. In spite of this, the massive tree trunks were still standing on the ground, the branches still sticking out. What's going on? Why are the trees all dead? Yun Yang looked around, unable to comprehend the situation. With his eyesight, he could tell that these trees were still alive and thriving 2 to 3 days ago at the latest. Some of the branches still had signs of healthy sprouts, but they were all withered now. Under such circumstances, they would have been blown away by the wind even if it had been more than 2 days. However, here came the puzzling question: what could have caused these trees to wither in such a short period of time? Yun Yang tried to move his body to make sure that the explosion just now was not a coincidence. Only then did he stand up and move his body a few more times to make sure that there was no discomfort in his body. Instead, he was more agile and his vital qi flowed energetically. He was in a state that he had never been in before. Deep in thought, he walked to a large tree and extended his hand to support it, murmuring, "What's going on?" Suddenly, there was a poof. Just as he touched the tree with his hand, the tree, which was so thick that it would take at least a dozen people to wrap their arms around it, suddenly turned into dust with a bang and fluttered down. Yun Yang retracted his hand as if he had been electrocuted, dumbfounded. Just now, I didn't use any spiritual energy in my hand. Besides, even if I used a considerable amount of cultivation, I could indeed smash this tree into powder, but it seems that I can't do it in such a state where there's no moisture at all. How could I have such a powerful being? Today was probably Yun Yang's day of shock. Unexpected situations came one after another, one after another. As the huge tree suddenly turned into dust, it was as if a signal horn had been blown. All the trees in the surroundings seemed to have been summoned, and without exception, they all fell down in large swathes. Then, they turned into dust as well. Yun Yang soared into the air and stood high in the air, watching in bewilderment as all the trees within a radius of hundreds of miles from where he was fell, turning into dust from near to far. Everywhere he looked, the dust obscured his vision. And in this entire area, it seemed like he was the only one close to this earth-shattering dust. Other than that, there was nothing else with any signs of life. Yun Yang, who was hovering in the air, was dumbstruck. Chapter 879. The silhouette hovering in the air was dumbstruck. Are you serious? According to the usual practice, it's only a rule to compensate an ascendant with some spiritual qi of heaven and earth. However, the ascendants in the past would at most make the trees within 30 to 40 feet wilt and be fine. Why is this person sucking 1,500 miles of forest dry today? What's going on? Could it be that this person has cultivated some demonic skill that allows him to devour the breath of living? So what if that's the case? What does it have to do with me? I'd better leave as soon as possible. To come and see, what's his background? It'll be troublesome if I get too involved with such a person. The silhouette hovering in the air disappeared with a swoosh. In Yun Yang's deific consciousness space, Emmy stretched lazily. Its leaves looked even more green and healthy before it went back to sleep. What's going on? Yun Yang's mind was still muddled, filled with questions that he could not unravel. I've come to the bound of universe as an ascendant this time. My previous experience has already proven this. How could I be thrown into a place like this? Don't I need to go through the registration procedure? Is there no one to receive me or follow up arrangements? Could it be? For a moment, many questions piled up in his mind, but none of them could be answered. It was only after some time when the dust had almost settled that Yun Yang realized that he had really been dumped here. He was certain that there was no one to receive him. No matter what, this young master is the unrivaled expert of the lower realm. How can there be no one to receive me when I come here? I don't even see a living person. I'm just dumped in the wilderness where there's no sign of human habitation. What's going on? Is this some kind of plot? Yun Yang grumbled, his heart filled with unhappiness. His high spirits earlier had vanished without a trace. While he was sorting out his emotions and getting his bearings, he raised his head to look at the position of the sun. He saw a small black dot in the sky falling down like a meteor. With a loud bang, the black dot rushed into the sea of dust that had just stopped after a long time. Then, poo, surprisingly, it was a person who fell into the thick dust. As expected, he choked and spat out the dust from his mouth. However, as he breathed, he unconsciously inhaled even more dust. His voice was extremely hazy, pay. What is this? Following the complaint, the person struggled to stand up. Yun Yang glanced over and saw that the person was a rotund little fatty who did not look very old. This little fatty had a round head, round face, round eyes, round nose, round mouth, round ears, round belly. He actually looked quite funny. This fellow had just climbed out of the powder pit and was desperately rubbing his eyes with both hands. At the same time, he cleverly blew upwards with his mouth to blow off the powder on his face, but it only made the powder dance in the air. Then, he remembered, damn it, why am I blowing? Why don't I use water? Before his words echoed in the air, a water sack appeared in his hand with a flick of his wrist. He poured out some water to wash his face and eyes and shook his head like a pug, flinging the water droplets off his face. Then, he opened his eyes to look around and suddenly cried out, "Mother, how did this happen? Where's the forest?" The little fatty's cry sounded like he was grieving the death of his parents. It was obvious that he had lost his soul and there was a lot of disbelief in his voice. It was as if the boundless powder in front of him had shocked him greatly. Then, the little fatty waved his hands and a powerful force rose from the ground. In an instant, all the dust within a few hundred feet of where he stood was swept up and thrown somewhere. After a long while, there was a loud rumble as if another cloud of dust had risen from the other side. The little fatty, who had cleaned up his surroundings, did not stop moving. Like a hunting dog, he searched back and forth on the exposed mountain rocks, as if he was looking for something. As he looked, his nose sniffed wildly. After searching for a few hundred feet, he waved his hand and threw out a cloud of dust. The fellow looked and sniffed as he walked. When he finally found the spot where Yun Yang was standing, he did not look up. Instead, he sprawled on the ground, searching carefully for clues. After a while, he suddenly cried out, "Oh, my yellow heaven! The mark I made is right here. This is obviously the forest, but, where is the forest? Where did it go? Yunyang looked down and saw a round rock about 30 to 40 feet below his feet. There was a tortoise carved on it in a crooked manner, perhaps with a saber or a sword. It was a vivid likeness. The tortoise was stretching its neck out strenuously to look outside. At this moment, the little fatty was also lying on the ground, stretching his neck with great effort. He turned his head to look to the side. Looking at it this way, it was truly lifelike, complementing each other. The object resembled the owner, and there was no way they could be more compatible. Yunyang could not help but be amused. This fellow seemed to be a clown. Yunyang's amusement did not matter, but the little fatty below him was shocked. He sprung up and flew hundreds of feet away before raising his head in panic to look at Yunyang, who was high up in the sky, and exclaimed, "Oh my God, there's someone here. You, who are you? Why are you here? You, are you a human or a ghost? You, what's going on here?" Yunyang was exasperated. Looking at the little fatty's movements and cultivation base, he was already a peerless expert. However, it was a fellow with such a cultivation base who did not even notice that Yunyang had been standing on top of his head for a long time. He had been crawling around like a mouse under his feet for a long time, not realizing that there was a living person standing on top of his head. Such vigilance was a rare sight indeed. Yunyang sighed inwardly. How did a person with such intelligence and vigilance survive in the bound of universe, a world where danger lurked at every step? Not only did he grow so big, but he was also so fat. Before Yunyang could speak, the little fatty reacted swiftly, retreating hundreds of feet away in the blink of an eye. He stared at Yunyang warily and suddenly shouted at the top of his lungs, "Who are you? Where has this forest gone to? You're outrageous. Did you see this young master's secret signal just now?" Without waiting for Yunyang's reply, he had already spat out, "What a scoundrel, you refuse to give up your evil intentions. If so, this young master shall fight it out with you today." With a roar, he put on a fighting stance and said in anguish, Come on. This young master shall drag you down with me today. Even a rabbit will bite when it's cornered. How dare you, a pretty boy, bully me like this? Is there still justice in this world? Where's the justice in this world? Yunyang was exasperated. This fellow was not just a weirdo, he was sick. In the blink of an eye, little fatty did not waste any more words. He had already turned into a round bolt of lightning and leaped over. In his hand, a long whip that flickered with golden light appeared as he attacked with great force. Yunyang, who had been through many battles, was not flustered. Focusing his gaze, he saw that there was a shiny ball at the tip of the long whip in the little fatty's hand. The long whip was obviously a unique long whip, a meteor hammer. Yunyang's thoughts raced as he raised his hand abruptly and hollered, "Wait!" Swoosh! As if bitten by a snake, the little fatty retreated hundreds of feet away with a whoosh and hollered, "Are you afraid? It's good that you're afraid." Chapter 880. Looking at the child's pale face from the sudden turn of events, Yunyang could not help feeling amused. Who was the one who was afraid? He had only raised his hand and you'd run hundreds of feet away like a startled bird. Such courage, it was no wonder that the word afraid was used. Yunyang said, "What do you mean by not giving up? What do you mean by going too far? What you're saying is rather random. I don't even know you. At most, I'm just a passerby who happened to bump into you. There's no need to make a big fuss about it. It's futile and will only add to my troubles." Yunyang was not afraid of trouble, but he had just arrived in the bound of universe after all. He was unfamiliar with the place and people, so it was best not to stir up trouble if he could avoid it. Furthermore, there was a hidden meaning in the fatty's words. How could Yun-yang be a scapegoat for no reason? The fatty was taken aback and asked suspiciously, "You're really not here to kill me? Here to capture me? To ravage me? To mess with me?" Yun-yang's exasperation deepened. "No, I won't do it even if you're willing." The fatty chuckled, his expression relaxing. He then kept the whip and put on a smile as if he had been blessed by the heavens. He cupped his fists together enthusiastically and said, "I was wondering, how could my enemy be so handsome and charming? It turns out that a good friend has arrived. It's fate, it's fate." Friend? Fate? Becoming friends just because he's not hunting you down? Could it be that this is what you call fate? The fatty's round face was filled with a friendly smile as he asked in a flattering tone, "Big brother, tell me, how did you become so handsome? This young brother is truly envious and jealous." Yun-yang broke out in a cold sweat and raised his hand. "Stop, am I that close to you? I'm just a passerby." The fatty laughed and said, "You're just a passerby. It's a coincidence, it's fate. Aren't all friends born from coincidental encounters? We'll get closer in the future. This young brother Qian Duo, may I know big brother's name?" Qian Duo, what a nice name. Yun-yang thought to himself, are the people of the bound of universe all so friendly? Or could it be that this little fatty had ulterior motives? Putting everything else aside, the fatty's cultivation, the unique hammer whip, and the interspatial ring showed that he came from an extraordinary background. That day, Lei Dongtian boasted that he was second to none. However, compared to the fatty in front of him, it was obvious that he was far from it. After some thought, he answered honestly, "I am Yun-yang." After all, he was a newcomer, so there was no harm in saying his real name. Cloud Rising Wind, a good name, a good name. Qian Duo's honest face was filled with flattery. What a great name. Suddenly, with a swooshing sound, the serpentine meteor mace appeared above Yun-yang's head soundlessly and came crashing down, its murderous intent multiplying. This could be said to be extremely sudden, and it was impossible to guard against. In spite of this, Yun-yang had long been prepared. After all, he had encountered too many deceitful people before. As the saying went, those who were unaccountably solicitous were hiding evil intentions. They did not know each other, but the fatty was so friendly the moment they met. It was absurd. Yun-yang had long been prepared for this. It was still the same old saying, one could never be too careful when one had just arrived in this strange world. There was nothing wrong with being careful. The saber light flashed. But with a clang, the blade of heavens will struck the meteor hammer head-on. He really didn't know what material the meteor hammer was made of. It didn't look very big, but it actually didn't get split in half by the blade of heaven's will. Yun-yang's body shook in response to the attack, but he was completely unharmed. However, he was more cautious than ever. Just now, little fatty's hammer had come and gone without a trace. His technique could not be said to be uncanny, and it was even more powerful and heavy. Obviously, this little fatty was not as weak and useless as he appeared. The jesting just now was a smokescreen to confuse the enemy. This fellow was obviously a top-notch expert. Recalling how flustered the fatty had been when he retrieved the meteor mace and how he had almost smashed himself, Yun-yang could not help sneering inwardly. This innocent and harmless little fatty was not only skilled, he was also an expert who knew how to pretend to be weak. He was not to be underestimated. On the other side, the fatty was even more shocked by the current situation. He had thought that his plan had worked, that he was confident, and that he was going to win with all his might, but it had been deflected by someone else's saber. Not only did the hammer that was usually hard to match not gain the upper hand, but his entire body had also been sent flying 30 feet away from the opponent's counterattack. Was this not proof of the opponent's valiant ability? The fatty, who was prepared to see his opponent's head explode, was almost scared out of his wits. He cried out like a male duck, "You're actually a honor level 3 cultivator?" Suddenly, he wailed, "Oh my God. I can't believe I ran into a metal plate in such a remote place. Is there still justice in this world?" Seeing Yun Yang approach with his saber, the fatty stumbled back while calling out in a fawning manner, "Big brother, big brother, big brother, this is actually a misunderstanding. It's really, just a misunderstanding, ah 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 ah." Suddenly, a saber light came slashing at him. The fatty was terrified as he rolled on the ground. He felt a chill on his face as a few strands of hair flew up from the corners of his eyes. At once, a deafening howl echoed in the air. This knife, completely disregarded his ability to dodge, had already accurately cut off a few strands of hair on the side of his face. The knife light flashed, and even stuck close to his face into the ground, but no matter what, in the end, it did not really hurt him at all. The source of that miserable howl was unknown, whether it was because he was scared, or because he was acting again. Yun Yang made a judgment instantly. If the fatty's howl was still an act, he would have to raise his evaluation by 2 levels. This was an acting talent, how could he be underestimated? The little fatty lay stiffly on the ground in an extremely awkward position. He closed his eyes and trembled all over. With a sad face, he wailed, "It's a misunderstanding, it's really a misunderstanding. Spare me, I didn't mean to do it just now, my hand just cramped up." "It's a misunderstanding," Yun Yang said coldly, "you still dare to play this game with me now. Not only are you brave, you're smart as well. Tell me directly, who are you?" As he spoke, he rubbed the saber against the fatty's face. The icy touch caused goosebumps to rise all over the fatty's chubby face. The little fatty's face was ashen as he stuttered, big brother. You. Please. Put the knife. Put it away. Little brother. I need to pee." Yun Yang kept the saber against the fatty's face and said in an unusually gentle tone, "Don't be afraid. My saber is very fast. When I chop off your head later, I promise you won't feel anything and won't know anything. I promise." The fatty looked like he was about to cry, his body twitching non-stop. Suddenly, he felt something warm in his crotch as it dripped. He wailed, I'm afraid of this. Speak." Yun Yang's tone was even colder than before. A certain someone claimed to be a neat freak, but he could not leave immediately at this juncture. He could only thicken his mystical chi to isolate some sort of aura. It would be strange if his tone was pleasant. "You must hold your hand steady. This is really a misunderstanding." The fatty's snot and tears were running down his face. "I thought you were one of those bastards who hunted me down. You wanted my treasure, that's why I—" "Brother, it's a misunderstanding, I swear to heaven and earth." "Treasure? What treasure?" Yun Yang could not help being stunned and asked instinctively. With a smack, little fatty gave himself a hard slap on the face. He was extremely annoyed. "That stupid mouth of yours, spitting out everything." You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.